All people deserve timely access to safe, effective, and quality-assured medicines. Strong national regulatory systems make this possible. They protect public health, foster innovation, and strengthen confidence in healthcare. Behind every regulatory decision are dedicated professionals working to ensure that science reaches patients safely and efficiently. Today, Regulatory Reliance is helping transform the way regulatory systems work, strengthening capacity, optimizing resources, encouraging international collaboration, and enabling faster access to medical innovation without compromising scientific rigor. EFPIA, FIFARMA, and IFPMA warmly welcome you to innovative approaches to regulatory reliance, strengthening regulatory systems through collaboration and evidence. Together, let's explore practical experiences, emerging evidence, and collaborative approaches to building stronger, more efficient, and more resilient regulatory systems. Thank you for joining us.
Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes para todos, dependiendo
Good
del
morning and
lugar
afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. So here, joining us are all the group of the parties involved, focusing on reliance with the regulatory systems through collaboration. The strengthening of these regulatory systems is fundamental. These are more resilient systems and more sustainable. And Reliance has consolidated itself as an enabler that uses the regulatory resources for safe, efficient medications and fostering collaboration between the different regulatory entities. Acknowledging the importance of this topic and motivated by our commitment to public health, FIFARMA, EFPIA, and IFPMA have strengthened our activity in the context of Reliance. My name is Diego Salas. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs for FIFARMA, and it is an honor to join you as a moderator during these sessions. Before getting started, I want to remind you that some of the conferences will be given in Spanish, others in English, and also in Portuguese. However, the simultaneous interpretation module is enabled throughout the entire activity so that you can hear the webinar in any of your preferred languages.
Explanation in English. This webinar will be available in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. To access the simultaneous interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language. For the best audio experience, we also recommend selecting Mute Original Audio. El webinar de hoy reúne a expertos internacionales, representantes de la industria farmacéutica,
joins experts, representatives from the pharmaceutical industry with the purpose of analyzing how we can act as a strategic and LA enabler to strengthen regulatory systems. Throughout these sessions, we will explore experiences, emerging evidence, tools, and perspectives in the region as Reliance to contribute to the development of these regulatory systems throughout the entire life cycle of pharmaceutical products. I would like to also invite for the opening words of this webinar, Janet Yija, Sergio Caballero, and Camila Gomez. Janet Yija, Executive Director of FIFARMA. Janet, welcome. Thank you, Diego. Very happy to be here in this encounter, reading everyone today. On behalf of FIFARMA, the Latin American Federation of Pharmaceutical Investigation and Development, or Research and Development, we'd like to invite you to talk about the regulatory focus for regulatory affairs. Now, I want to thank all of the people who've collaborated. Their contributions have been essential, both IFPMA and EFPIA. I also want to thank very especially all of the speakers and panel members and the Visa Agency from Brazil, ARCSA from Ecuador, and the Center for Innovation of Regulatory Sciences, and Udevia Global, and all of the experts that will share with us their experiences and their perspectives. It will be a very enriching encounter with a lot of focus and perspectives on this very important topic for the region. At FIFARMA, we would like to support, or we always support, the recommendations of the Pan American Health Organization and World Health Organization, and these are very important pillars for these development systems. So this is an essential role of the authorities to guarantee quality, efficacy, and to facilitate access to the patients. And so don't forget that this is the most essential focus, to have the best treatment, the best possible health, and with the regulatory systems, they have an essential role to play. So that's why we've spent several years with dialogue in Latin America, and we coincide with the practical tools of OECD to facilitate these regulatory practices, to make best use and to avoid duplicity and to advance towards more efficient sectors, and always keeping the highest regulatory standards. I'm sure and convinced that the experiences and the evidence and the different perspectives that we will know today will enrich this. So I'm convinced that in cooperation, we have enormous wealth, and in collaboration, we can also find ways for everyone in the region. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully, this is a webinar where we'll all learn and we can all learn a little more to connect a little more with the region. Thank you so much. I hand over to you, Diego. Thank you, Janet, for your leadership. And now I want to welcome our dear colleague from IFPMA, Sergio Caballero.
His welcoming remarks. Sergio, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Diego, and thank you, Janet, for that great introduction. So from our side, firstly, I just want to really give you everyone a big thank you to the organizers, to FIFARMA for the initiative, but also for being such a strong partner in the region. Also, a thank you to all the panelists, in particular to the regulators. It's really, really important that we have your perspective here. We know that regulatory reliance is already a reality in many parts of the world. But in order for us to implement it effectively, it's really important that we have a dialogue that is open, transparent, and that involves industry and regulators as well. So it's really welcome that we are doing this initiative here today. From IFPMA side, we are a solution provider in many different areas, and including on regulatory front. And we have a dedicated Reliance task force. Today, you'll hear from one of our experts, CC Lee, who will talk a little bit about some of the more technical aspects of implementing Reliance. And I'll just like to also say that we have published a number of different reports, position papers, and different publications on the topic of Reliance beyond initial marketing authorization. So you have publications on the topic of post-approval changes, on clinical trials, and good manufacturing practices as well. And those aspects, I think, are also important when looking at implementing Reliance effectively. Let's leave the time now for our speakers. We'll still hear from Camila, but again, thank you so much for bringing us in, and very happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for your welcoming remarks and for IFMA's leadership in advancing international regulatory collaboration. I will switch back to Spanish para darle también la bienvenida a nuestra colega Camila Gómez, Regulatory Policy Lead.
I'm going to welcome Camila Gómez, Leader for Latin America and Coordinator for the Latin American EFPIA Association. Thank you very much. I think we're all here very happy to hear this morning, afternoon, to hear the conference panelists. And on behalf of the European Federation of Associations in the Pharmaceutical Industries, we want to thank you all for this invitation. We have been cooperating with these associations in the formulation of Reliance, which is a guide for us. EFPIA tries to position the best practices which are adopted globally, also in international markets, and to facilitate the regulators in the world to understand the regulations, the processes in Europe to gain trust with the different agencies and also with the authorities, the references authorities, and also some regional groups to coordinate with the regulatory groups for Latin America. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Cami. Thank you, FIA, and we're going to go into our activity now. And I'd like to remind you that we won't take live questions for the panel members, but we would invite you to use the Q&A box that's in the lower part of your screen, and the panel members will be giving answers to your questions. So after this webinar and recording will be shared with everyone and also with a document with the answers to all of the questions that could come up in this activity. So we're going to get started with the part of innovation and regulatory science, where Dr. Marta Guyar will share with us the findings of an investigation on the use of the regulatory analysis in Latin America. And then we're going to have the European Agency of Medications sharing their experiences with the use of regulatory reliance and with the use of reliance products for later changes. So with IFPMA, they're going to show some of the tools that exist globally, developed with the pharmaceutical industry to use regulatory reliance in the whole life cycle of the pharmaceutical products. And after this, the colleagues from De La Global will show the results of a study on the economic savings implied by the adoption of Reliance for the trade and commercial use, and also joined by Dr. Daniel Sanchez, Executive Director of AXA, the agency from Ecuador, Dr. Daniela Marreco, Director of the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency and Visa, and Leonardo Semprum, co-chair of the Regulatory Affairs Working Group for FIFARMA. So,
Magda Bujar, Associate Director at the Center for Innovation in Regulatory Science, who will deliver today's opening presentation entitled Why Regulatory Reliance Matters, Global Collaboration and Insights from a New Latin American Story. Magda, thank you very much for joining us today. The floor is all yours, and you can share your screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Diego. And hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this really exciting webinar. I think we have a lot of really exciting presentations and updates that we will hear from. And it's really a pleasure to be here today among so many esteemed colleagues and experts on this topic of reliance. I'm here representing CRS, the Center for Innovation Regulatory Science, which is a not-for-profit organization. We have been around for over 35 years, bringing together different stakeholders really to generate and debate evidence to support timely registration of medicines globally. And that also includes LATAM. So what I wanted to talk about in today's presentation is why regulatory reliance matters and describe a collaborative effort that CRS has been undertaking through a study together with Latin American agencies. And what I will do through this presentation is to share some of the insights that we have generated from this study. And I just wanted to also acknowledge other colleagues from CRS who are here also at this webinar, particularly Juan Lara, who undertook a lot of the work described in the study, as well as Mario, who joined him on a number of the interviews. So just wanted really to also share that they are also on the call, and we would be happy, of course, to answer any questions in the chat as noted. So the agenda for today's presentation is first of all to talk about regulatory systems and how they are important for ensuring timely availability of medicines. Then to talk about how regulatory reliance is an enabler of system strengthening. I will then describe the mechanism, so the study that CRS has undertaken for monitoring Reliance globally. And I will share some of the insights that we have already generated, some of the initial study results, and also opportunities from this study. But just really wanted to note one thing, because this word was already mentioned, dialogue between stakeholders. And the idea of this analysis is really to support constructive dialogue within the region and continuous improvement when it comes to implementation of Reliance. So it's really, I think, an exciting study to get this information and now starting to have a think how we can utilize it to actually make a change in how Reliance is implemented and make the landscape better. So starting with the introduction, regulatory systems for medicines registration. These are really frameworks which are used by authorities, as you're all well aware, in order to approve medicines with regards to its safety, efficacy, and quality. And these frameworks are a strategic component of public health infrastructure. However, we know that there have been many rapid advances when it comes to the review of medicines, and that also regulatory systems are becoming more variable when it comes to, for example, capacity, efficiency, and resource. And although there are harmonization efforts such as the ICH to improve alignment, we are still seeing gaps across agencies. And what is really critical, and this is something that WHO and PAHO advocate for, is actually ensuring that regulatory systems are fit for purpose and that there is efficient review, and also important to prevent patient delays by having efficient review systems. So within CRS, we also organize different meetings and workshops, and Mike Ward, who was at the WHO, has shared this quote with us that, in fact, it's important that regulatory systems are science-based and that every agency should have in place an approach that focuses on what cannot be done by other agencies, so leveraging work of other NRAs. So this kind of collaboration is extremely critical, and it can lead to mutual benefit and measurable public health gains through the use of Reliance. And what we also know is that there is a strong relationship. So actually, Reliance is seen as one of the key pillars enabling strong regulatory systems, and it's supported by the foundation of harmonized technical guidelines, so ICH. So we can see that Reliance is in fact a pillar of strong regulatory review systems. So to further explain really what Reliance means, I wanted to share some definitions and quotes. Firstly, from WHO, which defines Reliance as the act by which one regulatory authority takes into account or gives significant weight to assessments performed by another regulatory authority in reaching its own decision. And it's important to note that the actual relying authority remains independent, so responsible for its own decision taken. So that means that sovereignty is fully preserved. Also, PAHO, which held this meeting recently, a number of recommendations were developed. One which was the inclusion of Reliance-related provisions and language in legal documents. So it's important to have provisions for Reliance in the framework, to encourage member states to use Reliance, especially those with limited resource and capacities, and also finally monitor the use of Reliance, which is really what we're trying to do through this study. And also EMA has noted, and I think this is, a very important message, is that actually Reliance and collaboration are 21st century regulatory tools that they can be used irrespective of maturity or resource, that any agency, in fact, can and should be using Reliance really to take advantage of work done by other agencies and to, again, focus on value-added activities. So we also know that Reliance is not a new concept. It's a long-standing regulatory approach that was, in fact, promoted since the 1960s, but it was more formally defined through the development of good Reliance practices in 2021. And we can see those principles listed on the left. And within those, there are a number of considerations. For example, flexibility that actually Reliance, there isn't a one single Reliance approach, and every agency will need to adapt this and to have different systems in place, templates, SOPs, strategy, legal frameworks, resources, etc. So all of these things will need to be put in place in order to ensure the success of Reliance implementation. So again, it's important to look at these principles and considerations from good Reliance. And I think what's also really exciting is that the value of Reliance is actually shared across the entire health ecosystem by a number of different stakeholders. So for the regulatory agencies, it's about resource optimization, having faster approvals, being able to build capacity through expertise, aligning with global, and also reducing backlogs. We can see that Reliance is successfully achieving that. Also for companies, it's about really getting the medicines earlier on the market, having lower costs and also greater predictability. For healthcare providers, it's really about making sure it's actually a quality medicine, but also timely access and better continuity of care. But also, of course, ultimately for patients, it's about having improved health outcomes, equity, and quicker access to those medicines. Also, in the case of emergencies when Reliance could be used. So I will be showing some results from the CRS monitoring study, but before, I also just wanted to highlight this one slide from our industry benchmarking study, which suggests that actually having well implemented and clearly defined Reliance pathways does improve regulatory timelines. And what we can see in this graph is just a few examples from countries. So I'll give the highlighted example, Argentina, where we broke down the timelines. We can see in the green is the submission gap, so median gap between the first market approval and growth and emerging market submission. And then in yellow, we have the approval time in that country, so time from submission to approval. And what we can see is actually having Reliance in certain cases can reduce timelines. So the approval time is faster for the abridged route compared to full assessment. So actually, Reliance can improve regulatory timelines and ultimately support the faster rollout of medicines. And we can see the similar trend for some of the other agencies as well, where either verification or abridged, the two Reliance routes are faster than a full assessment. So I think it's very encouraging to see that there is this impact on access to medications. So just to describe in a little bit more detail the study that CRS has undertaken. It's really what we felt is although we knew that agencies around the world are implementing Reliance as part of their toolkit, we also were aware, of course, that the good principles of Reliance have been defined by WHO. But what is perhaps not clear is even though agencies are already utilizing tools like the global benchmarking tool, we're not exactly sure how well the Reliance pathways are actually monitored themselves. So what we identified is really a lack of approach for monitoring regulatory Reliance per se. And in fact, this is something that we also think is actually critical because in order to improve pathways, we need to understand how they are currently working. So this monitoring study is very critical to understand the current landscape and really expand opportunities for improving those pathways and their effective implementation. So as a result, CRS began this new initiative to develop this approach for monitoring Reliance with the objectives, first of all, of assessing implementation of Reliance in selected LATAM countries. There were 10 countries that we initially selected, but there is already interest perhaps to expand the study globally. Through this, we want to identify barriers and enablers for implementation of Reliance, identify areas for improvement and alignment with good Reliance practices, and then finally foster collaboration and also knowledge exchange within the region. So it's really about having a dialogue as part of this work and project and really to ultimately enhance regulatory efficiency and support this type of continuous improvement and dialogue and discussion. So now moving into the scope of the analysis, what we wanted to analyze are different reliance approaches. We know that different agencies can have different approaches in place. For example, recognition, verification, abridged, and depending on level of cooperation with other agencies, they may also have mutual recognition or a collaborative joint work share type pathway. And then reliance can also be implemented within different functions. So the initial study that we undertook focused on the marketing authorization function as a deep dive. And also we will be looking in the next phase to look at some of the other functions as well. And what we were really grateful for is having strong commitment from 10 agencies. As I've mentioned, we limited the scope to 10 agencies initially. And perhaps one of the most important things to mention about this study is this wasn't just an analysis of those 10 agencies. We actually worked directly with each of these 10 agencies listed here on the slide, where we interviewed them and we worked together with them when it came to designing the study. And we've just had a meeting actually yesterday with the agencies as well. So we're just really grateful for all their hard work and also commitment to strengthen these pathways. So we do hope that ultimately this is a study that we can continue to also expand, as I've said, to other regions. So when it came to the method, just wanted to also mention that as part of this work, we had a topic group, and this was really a group that helps us to design the method and also review some of the process steps. And this group was made up of all the 10 agencies, Swissmedic as chair with Anvisa as co-chair, EMA and industry experts. And as part of the approach that you can see is that we had a data collection tool where we first of all collected information from the public domain through desk-based research, and we then utilized this information through in order to then have interviews with agencies. So we validated some of the information from public domain and collected some additional information on their experience and perception as well. And we are just in the process of collecting also the industry perception, which we are hoping also to incorporate into the final report of the study. So I just wanted to mention that, in fact, within the within the work that we have undertaken, we've actually looked at specific guidances. I think this is really important to mention that for the different agencies, we actually looked at specific reliance pathways which were utilized, and this was really the basis for the analysis. So these are just example of documents for Argentina, Brazil, and Ecuador, but for all the 10 agencies I mentioned, we had specific regulations that we first of all reviewed, and then, as I've said, this was supplemented through discussions with the agencies. So now moving into the results, because we have now completed the desk-based research and review, and I just wanted to again acknowledge the agencies who have provided helped us validate this information as well. So what I will just share are some of the really high-level results. And when we look at the results at the country level, first of all, we found that Reliance is being increasingly formalized, and that's through frameworks and strategies. So most agencies do have in place guidances, about 70% policies, but very fewer have mutual agreements or SOPs. We also found that most agencies do have a national strategy for Reliance in place. But when it came to publication, so actually a publication of the strategies and metrics and impact for Reliance, we found that this is not something that all agencies do. So again, when it comes to monitoring and transparency, these are perhaps areas where which were highlighted as something agencies are not currently doing. Another key finding, as we found, is that Reliance is already generally embedded in routine practice, is that most agencies are already utilizing Reliance, and they also ensure necessary competence for Reliance through training, for example, of reviewers. and fostering cultural and organizational acceptance of Reliance through such training activities and allocating also different resources in IT to ensure that Reliance is being utilized. And what we found is that actually Reliance is used as part of routine regulatory practice by most agencies already. And when it came to the practicalities, then we actually found that most agencies have different Reliance pathways in place, but the majority have an abridged type Reliance pathway where there is some information still reviewed under local context. But fewer agencies have other Reliance type of pathways in place, such as recognition, verification, or collaborative. When it came to the product type, we actually saw that Reliance was applied across different types of products, but all the 10 agencies utilized Reliance for chemical entities and generics. And some of the other product types was more limited, for example, combination products, cell and gene therapies. And all agencies recognize multiple different reference authorities when it came to Reliance. FDA and Health Canada were included by all 10 agencies as their reference. And then finally, when it came to the marketing authorization also function, when it came to the reference authority documentation requirements, these requirements were largely aligned. So most agencies pretty much required CPP, GMP, and approval letters. And we also wanted to dig into this concept of sameness, which is really important, and I'm sure others will touch on in their presentation. And what we found is out of the 10 agencies in the region, 70% had a framework for assessing product sameness. So whether or not the reference product is the same or essentially the same as the one that they have received. However, only 4 agencies use a specific template to undertake such an evaluation. And then finally, we also wanted to look at the types of measures that agencies have in place. So we saw that Reliance systems are established through target timelines. So most agencies do have target timelines for Reliance. They also have a list of reference authorities, a list of documents, but not all agencies publish actually why a Reliance decision was undertaken, any national adaptations, or the rationale for the Reliance-based decision. So just in the final few minutes, just wanted to present also some of the insights that were raised by agencies here, really asking what is holding back the implementation of regulatory reliance based on agency responses. And we can see the highest response was resource constraints, followed by still some areas where the legal framework may not enable reliance, differences in regulatory standards also, and finally, access to some of the information needed to undertake a reliance review. And then also we asked the agencies on their insights when it comes to some of the priority actions that could be undertaken to support implementation of reliance. And again, perhaps not a surprise, but based on the previous graph, but still the improvement and provisions of the legal and regulatory framework came as the top priority action, followed by having clear governance and procedures. So for example, SOPs. Again, that was what we saw earlier, not something that agencies were still implementing. And then finally, expanding regional and international cooperation. So just some final key insights is, I think what we saw in the presentation is that reliance is legally enabled. We're seeing it is very much happening and being institutionalized across the agencies. Reliance is already being routinely used through bridge pathways and specifically. And many of the reliance approaches that we are seeing are generally reflecting the good reliance practices. We are seeing, for example, agencies are specifying and publishing different requirements like documentation, reference authorities, target timelines. They are engaging stakeholders in the reliance pathway implementation and also investing in capacity training and systems to support reliance as well. In terms of what could be improved, I think the initial findings showed that actually there is still some improvement when it comes to legal frameworks that is needed at agency level to further strengthen and also help clarify. And then also the actual operationalization through SOPs, guidelines, and structured processes or training. This study also highlighted that actually not all agencies are currently monitoring reliance, and this is, I think, really an effort that helps to also bridge that gap to help evaluate how reliance is working in different countries and measure the impact. But this is something that could be developed further. And also some technical implementation of reliance, for example, through sameness templates could also be expanded. And of course, I think with more resource being invested into reliance and also having more regional cooperation, I think that could also further help improve the use of reliance going forward. So just to summarize the presentation, I think really the critical message here is that reliance is key and it's really a good mechanism for ensuring timely availability of medicines globally. However, to make reliance work, we also need to measure it. And CRS has developed a mechanism for monitoring regulatory reliance, reflecting the WHO good reliance practices. And this initial project focused on 10 LATAM agencies who are all very much engaged, and we've been collaborating and in really constant dialogue with those agencies. So this has really been just an initial readout of the results, but we will be also producing an overall report. But I think the initial insights really demonstrate reliance is already widely established, widely used. And there is strong legal foundation, but actually operationalization could still be improved by having perhaps better frameworks and also resources. And the final message, of course, that this continuous monitoring is really key to have this collaborative learning exercise that we are here in the middle of. And this is really key for, I think, improving these reliance pathways. So with that, wanted to thank you very much for listening and thank you once again to the agencies and CRS for their support and FIFARMA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magda, for that excellent presentation and for sharing the findings of this important study that we are developing together with the agencies to strengthen regulatory system across Latin America. We truly appreciate your valuable insights. Para todos los asistentes, en el chat de esta llamada está apareciendo un enlace
For
disponible en
every
la página web
attendee, you
FIFARMA,
have
donde
a
pueden acceder a la
link
presentación de
where
la
you can
doctora
access
Magda
the
Bullar
presentation
con los resultados
by
de esta
Dr. Magda
investigación.
Bullar with the results of
Es
this
un honor ahora
investigation.
presentar
Now
a
it's an honor
Victoria Palmi,
to introduce Victoria
International
Palmi,
Affairs, Senior International
International
Affairs
Senior
Officer
International
en la
Affairs
Agencia
Officer
Europea
at
del
the
Medicamento, quien por
European
segundo año consecutivo nos
Medications
acompaña
Agency.
también en
For the
este
second year in a row, she's
webinar.
joining
Victoria,
us in this
bienvenida,
webinar.
muchas
Victoria,
gracias.
welcome,
Adelante,
and
por favor.
thank you.
Buenas tardes, buenos días a todos. Muchas
Good
gracias por la
afternoon, good morning to
invitación.
all. Thank you for the
First of all,
invitation.
Magda, your presentation was really nice and resonates with what I'm going to say. I will switch to Spanish now. Es un placer estar con todos ustedes.
It's a pleasure to be with all of you,
Es un
and
tema muy importante,
it's
me
a
encanta
very
la
important
flexibilidad de
topic
este webinar
regarding the
y también
flexibility
ver un poco
of this whole topic and to
toque
see
que le estamos
that
dando
innovative touch that you're giving
al tema.
this topic. And
Me gustaría empezar un poco
I'd
dando
like
los
to start
resultados que hemos
off
tenido
giving the results
con el piloto que hemos
that we have with
empezado
this pilot and
sobre Reliance en
that we have on
procedimientos de
Reliance, and of course
post-autorización.
the post-authorization procedures.
Y
And
bueno, después de la introducción que han tenido, voy a
after the
centrarme un
introduction,
poco
I'm
a
going
centrar en los
to
datos,
work or talk
en
about
dar
the
un poco
data
el contexto de
and
lo que
give you some
queremos
context of what we want
solucionar con el
to
Reliance.
solve
Como
in Reliance and
hemos
how,
escuchado,
as you've heard,
todos estamos un poco compartiendo los
we're
mismos
all
retos. Los
sharing
productos cada vez se aprueban
the
antes
information on the products to
y
see
lo
if
que
they're
pasa es que
approved
los sistemas
previously. And what happens is
regulatorios
that
están
the
un poco
regulatory
bajo una
systems
presión creciente.
are under
Vemos
pressure,
un
and
aumento en el volumen y en la
we have an
complejidad de
increase
los
in the
cambios
volume and complexity
post-autorización,
of the
que aumenta la
post-authorization
carga de todos los
changes, which
reguladores,
increases the load of all the
que
regulators. And
la divergencia que tenemos un poco entre
the
todos nosotros
divergence
de
we
los
have
requisitos y las
of,
clasificaciones
you know,
también
the
pone mucha
classifications
presión
and
a la
requirements
industria,
put a lot of
la
pressure on the
duplicación de
industry.
evaluaciones entre todas
The
las
duplication of these
evaluaciones
assessments and
pone un poco presión
all of
innecesaria entre
this
todos
puts
los
unnecessary
reguladores
pressure on the
y
regulators.
observamos que hay
And
una duplicación de evaluaciones y de tiempos de
we
revisión que son
realize that there is
difíciles de
duplication of the
predecir y en
assessment, and these are difficult analysis to
última
predict.
instancia también pueden provocar
And in
un
the last
poco
instance,
riesgo para
this
la
could
continuidad
cause
del
a
suministro de
risk on the
medicamentos
continuity of
y
the
por eso
supply of the
vemos que hay una
medications.
necesidad
And we see that
clara
there is a clear need,
eh,
uh,
no solo de utilizar
not
Reliance,
just
sino
to
como
use
decía
Reliance,
Carla, de
but
utilizar modelos que son
also to use
eficientes, que
models
son
which
más
are
predecibles y
efficient
sobre
and
todo
more
más
predictable and especially
colaborativos.
more collaborative.
Y un poco
And a little bit,
esta era la idea que
this was the idea
la
that
industria, un grupo de trabajo de la
the
industria,
industry and the
junto
work
con
group had
la OMS y
together with
EFPMA, intentamos
WHO.
darle un toque
We try
práctico para
to give it
implementar
a practical
Reliance
touch
también
to
en
implement
procesos de
Reliance as well
post-autorización.
in these
La idea
post-authorization
es muy
processes. The
sencilla, no
idea
volver a
is
evaluar
very
todo
simple,
desde cero cuando
not
ya
to reassess
existe
everything from
una
scratch
base científica sólida que se pueda
for a solid
reutilizar.
scientific base.
Y la idea es
And
que
the idea
la
is
industria mande el mismo paquete, el
that the
mismo
industry sends the same package, and
común de datos a todas las agencias reguladoras que han
with the
es el
data for
paquete
all
que ha
the
preparado la
regulatory
EMEA se mande a
agencies,
todas las agencias reguladoras,
sending all of these
acompañado de un
agencies,
informe de
and
evaluación de la EMEA. Y
with
así
all
podemos
the
también promover
information
evaluaciones
from EMEA,
más paralelas
and
entre todas las autoridades.
with
Esto es el
all the
mismo
authorities,
paquete,
and
evaluaciones en paralelo. Intentamos
these
que las agencias
parallel
puedan evaluar si
assessments,
pueden también adaptarse a los
we could
mismos
also
requisitos
adapt to the same
que
requirements
la Agencia Europea del Medicamento.
that the European
Y esto es de
Medications
forma
Agency has.
voluntaria, pero
And this
también
is
nos permite un poco
voluntary, but
evaluar
it
y
allows us to
entender
assess and
si somos un
understand
poco convergentes entre
if
nosotros,
we
si
are
podemos
converging
identificar,
among
si nos
us, and we
podemos
can identify
alinear o si
and
podemos ser un poco
align, and
flexibles en todos estos cambios, en todas estas
with all these changes and all of these
en todo lo que estamos
everything
pidiendo
that's going
para las
on
mismas
uh,
variaciones.
with these
A nivel
variations.
colaborativo también
Here
tener las evaluaciones en paralelo permite un
they
poco un
have these parallel
aprendizaje
assessments,
mutuo entre
and
todas las agencias y poder también un poco comparar los enfoques regulatorios
here we
diferentes que
compare the
todos
regulatory
tenemos.
focus, and
El objetivo máximo es de acabar la
the
evaluación en
main
6 meses.
objective
Digo
is to
máximo
finish
porque
the
no es
assessment
necesario
in 6 months. It's
tener
not
una evaluación de
necessary
una
to
variación en
have
6 meses.
this
En
variation in
60
6 months,
días,
and
idealmente
ideally
una variación a través de
Reliance has a
Reliance debería ser
variation,
más corto, pero
and
se
it
da
should be
un
shorter, but
máximo de
it would
seis
be a
meses
maximum
para
time of
acabar
6 months.
la evaluación.
And in the
Y el punto
assessment,
más importante es insistir en que el
and
enfoque
the important
no
thing is to
compromete la
insist
soberanía
that
regulatoria.
the
Cada
focus does
autorizado
not compromise this
mantener,
regulatory authority,
mantiene su
and
decisión
it maintains its
independiente
decisions
y el
independently,
Reliance no
and
externaliza
Reliance
las
does not
decisiones, sino que
externalize the
incorpora
decisions, but
expertos
it
adicionales
incorporates additional
en
experts
cada
and
agencia.
in each agency.
Los primeros
So
resultados que
the first
tenemos
results we have
los pueden ver en esta pantalla.
and be
Se han
seen on this
iniciado
screen, and
44 pilotos hasta hoy,
44
con
pilots have
cooperación
started so far
internacional muy amplia,
with
tanto
very broad international
la Agencia
cooperation
Europea como agencia de
and
referencia, pero sabemos
as
que
a
hay también otras
benchmark agency, but
agencias que están probando con los mismos
so
pilotos.
we
Y
have
los
to prove with these
resultados que
same
les voy a dar
pilots
hoy
what the results are.
son los datos que
And what
teníamos
I'm going to give you today
disponibles a
is the ones
final
we had
de
available
2025, que
at the end of
incluía
2025.
9 pilotos
So
completados y 9
here
variaciones
we
que
have
estaban en
9
curso.
pilots completed
Y
and
además
9
realizamos unas
that
encuestas a las
are
agencias
variations that were
reguladoras
underway.
y
So we had a work group with the authorities and another one with the industry. So the main results are very clear, and there's very clear participation, and this is feasible in practice, but for everyone, the trust in the evaluations, quicker evaluations and assessments, and this is a very important point to have for everyone. So when we have all this information in the countries, we saw that there was a clear interest and geographic diversity, but the participation is heterogeneous. So these were invited, and 77 of these organizations participated, seeing that or showing that there's a great interest. But there's authorities that participated in every pilot that were offered, and there were some that accepted to participate, and 36 agencies that did not participate. Most did just simply not answer. So there's a clear point of contact or no clear point of contact on how to start or how to, or to tell us that we have some barriers and opportunities there to broaden these reliance points, especially in regions like Latin America. When we look at the impact in time, we see that it's one of the most tangible ones, and the decisions were much faster. The authorities didn't tell us that for them it could be a savings of 75% of the agencies that answered indicated that it was much faster. And the industry estimates that they saved, or they felt savings between 15 and 80% in these processes, which are much more agile. And so this happens because we eliminated our unnecessary explanations, less questions, so decisions are much faster. If we look at the impact on resources, one of the observations is to ask what questions or what the agencies had asked when receiving the reports, and the half of the agencies did not ask any other questions. So we also asked in our surveys about the impact on the resources from the agencies, and we're told that there could be some strategic use of the resources, and some reported savings in their resources, 75% of them, and they had to strengthen their work, check what was duplicate efforts, and strengthen those that were done efficiently. So here's a relevant message, and we think that harmonization is previous requirements, and the way we wanted to think about this as a pilot, calling it a flexibility pilot for these processes, experiences shown us that this harmonization will be very difficult, but convergence can be achieved with these shared assessments. So Reliance allows us to be much more flexible when we're looking at these procedures individually, and even when the regulatory frameworks are different, you can apply this Reliance. So this is very specific productivity for many countries, and here you can have some stronger collaborative mechanisms. Here is the information that the industry has collected, and you can see the number of additional documents that have been read. So we had offered flexibility in the requirements, and the industries were trying to send the same dossier to everyone, but you can see here the number of requirements as well at the national level, and this was quite low. We also asked the regulatory agencies how they did Reliance, and their answer was similar to the information that you've just heard from Magda, which most of the agencies told us that they were reviewing the assessment report from the agency and then the dossier, and some of them were answered, or they answered that they wanted to review the assessments and all of the dossier, and there are some that indicated that they just looked at these. So in practice, what we see is that it depends on the context of each authority, the efficiency they want to give, the speed. So it takes some more or less flexible aspect. So this adapts to the context of everyone, what makes it feasible in many different landscapes. The agencies were also asked if they could rank the benefits contributed and through this pilot, and Reliance and the value of Reliance goes beyond science. And so, first of all of the regulatory agencies are concentrated on their backlogs and their resources, and that's their priority, but also they assess the strengthening of or the building of capacities, and this convergence or alignment with the standards. And so all of this contributes to something fundamental, which is the continuity of the supply of these medications. And to conclude, I would like to present the cooperation, the pilot between EMEA and WHO, which made a reality, and with the regulatory agencies and the industry that stated that Reliance is a key tool to manage not just the different programs and levels, but also to make changes more efficient. So, having said this, it's important to highlight, as Magda said, Reliance works, but the benefits are not automatic. So, it all depends on how Reliance is implemented. So, access to information, priority mechanisms, and to understand the experience in practice. So this is a little bit to leave you with a message, a key message. And this is not just, Reliance is not just a technical tool, it's a way to work together. And for Latin America, it could present this as regulatory systems, and to escalate Reliance in more sustainable practices, we have to strengthen the ways to work, and to have guidelines or pathways to understand how to work and how to strengthen the convergence of information, even if we have to be a little more flexible. And so to invest also, to have the capacities and for the assessors and for the industry. And maybe with this exchange we have here with the industry and the agencies, many of them could have exchanges with other agencies to see what they do with their work groups, to see how some of them were focusing on this flexibility. So also, as we just heard, we need to measure the impact because we might not know how to implement policies that could improve these processes, but we need to take advantage of the evidence that exists. If a report is issued from another regulatory agency, could be EMEA or any other one, but we have to harness that. We have to use it because the success will depend on, as we're doing it here in this meeting, on the commitment of the regulators and of everyone to advance together. And so, thank you very much. That was my last slide.
Victoria, muchas gracias por la
Thank you very much, Victoria, for your generosity, your time, and sharing your knowledge. And you said a fundamental word, which is exchange of experiences that leads us to build better systems. And it's inevitable to use some messages that you need to have a regulatory framework. And this Reliance. So Reliance has a very flexible focus that could be adopted depending on the context of the agency, but it's feasible regardless of the diversity of the sector. And the benefits depend on a structured implementation. And if we are here in Latin America, and thanks to EMA, it is used as a reference agency and in the world everywhere. So this means a lot to us. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, you can ask in the chat and we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. We will now continue with our next presentation, Global Industry Evidence to Strengthen Regulatory Reliance Across the Pharmaceutical Product Lifecycle. It is my pleasure to welcome Cici Lee, Director of Technical Advocacy and Policy, Regulatory Affairs, CMC, and MSD, who's joining us today on behalf of IFPMA and its Regulatory Reliance Task Force. Cici Lee, thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Diego. Can I check that you can see the PowerPoint?
Yes. Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you, everybody. I will be presenting in English. It is my pleasure to represent the IFPMA Reliance Task Force today to speak on behalf of the R&D industry on the topic of reliance. Here's the contents I'll be sharing. I'll be sharing with you the industry's views on the rationale and the key principles for regulatory reliance, the implementation across the product's life cycle and the different regulatory functions, and IFPMA's latest positions. I will also be sharing reliance experiences and also our recommendations. Industry supports reliance because regulatory workload and scientific complexity is outpacing capacity. Reliance is the bridge to close this gap, to enable smarter regulation, greater efficiency, and faster patient access without compromising standards. We have seen that reliance helps regulators and patients and also manufacturers. By using existing scientific reviews, regulators and inspectors can cut review times down and improve predictability for industry without lowering standards. For instance, we have studies that show many GMP inspections done of the same site by different inspectors repeat the same findings, and this takes up time and resources without significantly adding value. So reliance approaches do reduce this kind of duplication and let inspectors focus on higher risk sites and new technologies. So for industry, reliance means less paperwork burden and costs, and faster and more agile global launches. For patients, it means quicker access to medicines and more reliable supplies. So overall, our evidence supports the scaling up of reliance and making it a standard regulatory practice. We agree with the World Health Organization that Reliance can be used across the whole product life cycle and regulatory functions. This includes from clinical trials, marketing authorization, post-approval changes, all the way across to lab testing, vigilance, and market surveillance and control. In short, Reliance supports all stages from developments to post-market oversight. As Sergio alluded to earlier, on this slide, we try to localize all the position papers and publications related to Reliance that we have produced in recent years. So our paper on best practices for unilateral reliance, for instance, it shows the foundations of success for Reliance, which we feel can broadly apply across the different Reliance functions, not just for initial approvals and post-approval changes. The foundations are legal and regulatory frameworks, confidentiality and information sharing. We need strong rules to protect confidential data. So tools like confidentiality agreements or memorandum of understandings will help. Reference national regulatory authorities or NRAs. We need to have clear public understanding of which trusted regulators or WHO, WLA we can use or choose in that jurisdiction to apply Reliance. Scope and life cycle. We need Reliance to be able to be used for all product types and throughout their full life cycle. Clear risk-based process. So these processes should be simple, transparent, and easy to follow, commensurate to the risks of the products. And of course, faster and predictable timelines. Reliance should lead to shorter and more predictable review times, and hence better use of resources. And now we share some experiences and enablers for strengthening Reliance. Here, a note about sameness. Regulators need to verify product sameness for Reliance to work. We've pasted here WHO's definition for sameness, covering essential quality, safety, and efficacy aspects. The essential characteristics are highlighted in bold, so where there are differences in these characteristics, we will justify the differences. One of our key challenges is how to provide this information in a universal and efficient manner throughout the lifetime of that product's license across different jurisdictions, while at the same time ensuring timely regulatory approval for uninterrupted supply to patients. I will share some of our work on sameness. Here's our publication on the importance of sameness of products. We propose that the verification of sameness should be science-based, not dossier-based, meaning the focus is on the product's key characteristics, not on identical dossiers. We seek to show equivalent quality, safety, and efficacy through our global pharmaceutical quality system and according to ICH principles. We must be transparent about essential differences, and the information can be communicated primarily through a declaration and, where needed, early dialogue with the regulators, depending on the urgency and complexity. We have a suggested technical template to describe the detailed CMC differences as an optional review aid. The future direction of this is to further refine the suggested template based on feedback from our members and regulators. So here, collaboration is key because a universal approach to demonstrate sameness will ensure that this is an enabler and not a barrier to Reliance. Another enabler for Reliance will be a universal set of documentation alongside the core CTD dossier. We have a suggestion of the common set of documents for the initial marketing authorization submission and their variations. So in the interest of time, we won't be going through this in detail, but just to highlight that regarding the evidence of approval, for instance, if some regulators are starting to just accept a regulator approval letter as an evidence, and if there is also a declaration of sameness with information and the reference assessment reports, maybe there is no really a need for formal CPP. So maybe this can be considered. In the case of advancing GMP inspection reliance, our view is that the concept of GMP inspection, while it's a very mature concept, it's been around for a long time, it's still rather underused. So we see what appears to be duplicative inspections with limited added patient safety value. So there are multiple pilot initiatives that demonstrated GMP reliance works in terms of operationally. So the next step now is to move from international pilots to routine practice. So for this, we need to embed reliance in legal frameworks for inspections and also regulators' quality systems. So in terms of our future direction for this, IFPMA will be working closely with PICS colleagues on the matter of moving the needle on GMP inspection reliance. Some reliance experiences. Our members feedback that the MHRA's International Recognition Procedure, IRP, is a good example of a clearly outlined reliance process amongst many. It has precise documentation requirements, list of reference countries. We felt that there is flexible approach towards sameness in the sense that we can justify the differences and provide additional data to support it. For instance, using a different batch release site from a different reference from that of the reference country is a possibility in the IRP. So the timelines are short, and this is appealing to applicants. So here, another experience to share. We provide you some example of where dossier differences are considered acceptable by relying regulators. So different dossier content may exist between the reference country's dossier and the relying country due to various reasons that are the ones that are normally accepted by most regulators are here. So, for instance, the different level of detail for the same manufacturing control specifications or limits, but just different levels of details are provided. So, another example here is the situation where drug substance information is placed in different location in the dossier, either in Module 3 or in a separate DMF. So that is also deemed acceptable for reliance. And also different stability data submitted for the same products, but in different countries. So these differences have been routinely and often accepted by regulators, showing that reliance can be practical and flexible. Last but not least, a nod also to the EMA PAC's Reliance pilot. And so far, we also heard from Ms. Victoria Palmy about the latest updates. We have members reported 44 pilots initiated with EMA as the reference authority. So these kind of results show us that multi-country variation submissions using Reliance are possible, and they do improve efficiencies in submission, review, and approval. So this is really encouraging. So the next step is for EMA and industry to continue to collect data and lessons learned. Just to wrap up my presentation, so here are our final recommendations. Reliance is practical, so there is rising workload and complexity. It requires the use of global assessments, not duplication. So Reliance strengthens oversight. It builds on trusted decisions. Sameness should enable reliance and not be a barrier. So there is focus on equivalent quality, safety, and efficacy. We would like justified differences to be accepted and not just about identical dossiers. So we suggest to start simple, use existing reference assessment reports, request for proportionate documentation, prioritize clear declarations of sameness. With intention, we have the opportunity to move from pilots to routine global use across life cycle for faster access to and faster resilient supply. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cicely, for that excellent presentation. It clearly demonstrates how every stakeholder across the regulatory ecosystem has an important role to play in strengthening regulatory reliance mechanisms to build more efficient, resilient, and sustainable regulatory systems. We appreciate you sharing the industry's global perspective and evidence with us today. Before we move to our next lecture, we would like to invite all of our speakers to join us in addressing some of the questions submitted by the audience. We encourage participants to continue sending their questions through the Q&A section, and we will take a few moments to answer as many of them as possible. Nuestra siguiente presentación, ¿cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto es
Our next
el
presentation.
ahorro
How
de
much is
una
the
agencia
savings
regulatoria al
of a
implementar
regulatory agency
Reliance?
when
Este caso de
implementing
estudio es un caso de
Reliance?
análisis en el
This study
contexto de una
case,
agencia
this
regulatoria
analysis in the context of a
latinoamericana nos
regulatory
brinda una
agency
evidencia
in Latin
fenomenal
America gives
que
us
actualmente no
phenomenal
teníamos y que
evidence
creo que sin duda
that
alguna
we
abre
didn't have,
muchos
and I think
debates
that
sobre los
undoubtedly
beneficios de
opens the
Reliance y
debate on the
la
benefits
medición
of
que se ha hecho de
Reliance
estos
and the
eventuales
measurement that has
beneficios.
been
Quiero darle la
done
bienvenida
of these
al doctor
eventual
Diego
benefits.
Gutiérrez,
I want to
director
welcome
regulatorio
Dr.
de
Diego Gutierrez,
UDELA Global,
Regulatory
para esta
Director
presentación. Diego,
of
bienvenido, muchas gracias
Global
por
for
acompañarnos.
this presentation. Diego, welcome and
Muchas
thank you so
gracias a
much for being
ustedes
here
por
with
la
us.
invitación.
Thank you so much for
Voy a
your
compartir en este
invitation.
momento la presentación.
I will now be sharing the presentation.
Porfa, me avisan si ya se está viendo en pantalla
Please let me
completa.
know if we can see this on full screen.
Bien, muchas gracias. Bueno, voy a compartirles,
Perfect,
como
yes.
mencionó
I will be
Diego,
sharing,
una
as Diego
experiencia, un
mentioned,
ejercicio que
an
realizamos.
experience or an exercise
Es
that
un
we did,
estudio en el cual hacemos un análisis de costos
and it was a
en la
study
implementación del
where
mecanismo de
we did
Reliance
a cost
en la
analysis in the
agencia
implementation of
regulatoria
the
en
Reliance
contexto
mechanism
colombiano, es decir,
at
en la
the
agencia
regulatory agency in the Colombian context,
INVIMA,
meaning
a partir de un
at
caso base.
INVIMA through a
Bien,
base
entonces
case.
quiero iniciar comentándoles que
So I want to start by telling
participamos
you
en este
that
proyecto
we
pues, Diana
participated in
Gómez,
this
que
project with
es
Diana
epidemióloga,
Gomez,
Laura Ramírez,
and
es
who is an
economista y magíster
epidemiologist,
en economía,
Laura Ramirez,
Sergio
economist and
Basto, que
master's
es
in
químico
economics,
farmacéutico y
Sergio
magíster en
Basto,
salud
pharmaceutical
pública.
chemist with a master's in
Y yo
public
tuve
health.
pues el rol del
And
director del
I
proyecto
had the
y
role of
además
being the
soy el
project
director
director,
regulatorio regional
and I'm the
UDELA, soy
regional
médico, soy
regulatory
magíster en
director
farmacología.
of
Comentarles
UDELA. I am a
rápidamente
physician.
que
I
UDELA
have a
es una
master's in
empresa
epidemiology,
que se
and I want to tell you
encarga
that
de
UDELA
hacer
is
asesoría
a
y
company that is in charge of
consultoría en temas
doing
regulatorios
advisory
a
and
los distintos
consultancy and regulatory
actores
matters
del sistema
for
de
the different
salud.
stakeholders in the health
Bien,
system.
este tema del Reliance y la definición, pues no vamos a
Reliance
detenernos
and the
porque ya
definition
lo hemos
is
visto
not something
en
that we will be
la
going
mayoría
into
de
a lot of
ustedes,
detail because
digamos
we've
que lo
seen this
manejan.
a lot, and most
Entonces,
of you
vamos a
already know
pasar
what
a
this
ver
is
los
about. So
aspectos
we're going
generales del
to
estudio.
go and take a look at
Entonces,
the
lo primero
general
que hicimos
aspects of the
fue
study. So
estimar,
the first thing
digamos que
that
el
we did
objetivo
was
principal
estimate
fue estimar y cuantificar el
the
impacto
main
en costos,
that's the main goal, estimating
específicamente
and
con función
quantifying the
ahorro
impact in
para una
costs,
agencia
especially
sanitaria,
in
como
savings
les mencioné
potential
antes,
for a
en
healthcare
INVIMA,
agency.
derivado de la
And as I
implementación
mentioned,
del
that's in
mecanismo de
VIMA,
Reliance.
derived from the implementation
Digamos que
of
aquí
a
lo que hicimos
reliance
fue,
mechanism.
tuvimos que
And
limitar un
what we
poco el
did here
alcance,
was that
pues
we had
teniendo en
to
cuenta que la
limit
agencia
up the
regulatoria
scope a
tiene un
bit,
número
considering that
muy
the
importante de
regulatory
trámites.
agency has a very
Entonces,
important
lo que
number
hicimos fue
of
escoger
proceedings.
molécula
So what
nueva,
we did
que es
was
nueva entidad
taking
química
new
y nueva
molecules
indicación y basarnos,
and
digamos
new
que, en
indication
estos trámites para
and
hacer
base
el
ourselves
ejercicio.
in these procedures to do the
Lo hicimos
exercise.
porque, digamos
We
que
did
en esta
this
evaluación
because
son
we
evaluaciones que
consider
son
that
de las más complejas que hacen las
these
agencias
assessments
regulatorias,
are
pero
some of the
además en
most
donde
complex ones that the
participan en el caso
regulatory
de INVIMA
agencies do,
tres grupos
but
diferentes
especially
durante la
where in the
evaluación:
case of INVIMA,
el
three
grupo de seguridad
different
y
groups
eficacia, el
participate
grupo de
that
calidad
are
y
efficacy
el
and
grupo de
safety, quality,
farmacovigilancia, evaluando el
and
plan de gestión de riesgo.
pharmacosurveillance. And they're all
Y
assessing
lo
the
que
risk
planteamos
management
también fue
plan.
un
And what we
escenario actual,
stated
es
also
decir, en este
was a current
momento,
scenario,
siguiendo el paso a
meaning
paso del
right now,
procedimiento de
following
evaluación
the
de la
step by
agencia,
step
cuánto le está
of the
costando
agency's assessment procedure,
hacer el análisis de estos trámites
how much is it costing them to do the analysis of these processes? And then we stated some scenarios for intervention. So in these intervention scenarios, there were two different types of reliance. One which is partial reliance, and another one which is comprehensive reliance. And here also I wanted to mention that the mechanism stated was a unilateral reliance, taking as a reference the European Medications Agency. In addition to the professionals that I already mentioned, we have the support of professionals in each one of the components of the assessment, meaning safety and efficacy, pharmacosurveillance and quality. And these were professionals that had over 10 years experience, both at INVIMA as well as in other agencies in the region. And that was one of the strengths of the exercise. As I was mentioning, these scenarios were they were in the current scenario and the intervention scenarios. And here I wanted to specify a few things, and it's that comprehensive reliance wasn't stated as like the fact that the agency should approve this without any type of revision. A revision was stated directed more towards critical and safety aspects after assessing the European agency's assessment reports, but this maintains the autonomy of the regulatory agency, meaning we do some sort of review, even if it's in the comprehensive scenario. And in partial reliance, what we do or what we did was that the experts of the list of components that were assessed to make decisions in regards to these types of procedures selected the proportion of the information related to safety, efficacy, and quality and risk management plans. And this percentage of information that is going to be reviewed in the reliance scenario was selected with some use criteria and risk analysis. I will not stop here. I will only show you that what we did was map or organize this step by step that is taken by the regulatory agency in the new molecule and how it goes through the next groups, through the different groups, and what are or what is this that needs to happen within the agency. We calculate the times, and then also we did a cost considering the compensation of each one of the assessors of these groups within the regulatory agency. So what we did was organize the current process for new molecules, the current process for new indications, and seeing the professionals that were involved, the times, and as I was saying, their compensation. Then we organize some intervention scenarios, partial and comprehensive reliance for new molecules, and what the process would be for the analysis of the possible times and percentage in savings in times. And with this, we calculate the savings in general. Then we have the intervention scenario for partial and comprehensive reliance for new indications. The agency that was used for the mechanism of trust was the European Medications Agency, because it has agencies that are exercises that are posted in public information that's very robust. So when reviewing the information of the bibliography, we saw that the ideal agency to base the exercise. And we determined that there is a basic set of documents that are the common technical document, the GMP certificate, and the European Commission and the Public European Report for Assessment, which is a document that is very robust, very complete, and it has a lot of the aspects very detailed. for the assessment of products. And then finally, the assessment of the pharmaceutical products. And the analytical model basically takes or does an estimation of activity-based costing for current and new scenarios. And what it analyzes is the difference between the total cost of the current scenario and the scenario with intervention. Now, going to results, what we found was that applying this reliance mechanism, we analyzed 2024 and 2025. We have that for the new molecules in the partial reliance scenario. There is a potential savings of 1,672 million pesos. And with new indications, potential savings of 741 million. And in comprehensive reliance, savings could be much greater. In the case of new molecule, it could be 2,035 million. And in new indication, 986 million pesos for the years where we did the exercise. Here I have the information in dollars, and the savings can be $500,000 for new indication, 215,000. And for comprehensive reliance, new molecule, 600,000, and new indication, $285,000. And looking at this lower table, we see that the savings percentage in the partial reliance scenario can go from 72 to 76%. And in comprehensive reliance, it can go from 87 to 91% of savings. We did the deterministic sensitivity analysis for the assessed procedures. And here, what's interesting is that there is an aspect that can modify this savings in a very important matter, and it's the experience of professionals that are in charge of doing a trust-based assessments. However, regardless of the possible variation, the savings will be very important. So, regardless, savings can be located between 65 and 80%. So, these were very interesting results. As conclusions and recommendations, what we can say is that the implementation of a trust mechanism, and I was mentioning it previously, like there's a broad range, there's a flexibility that is really good to implement it in the regions, agencies, but based on the mechanism that we want to implement, it has the savings potential and a reduction between 74 and 90% depending on the level of trust that is applied. And this obviously is translated into the number of assessments that we will be able to do. Right now in Colombia, there is a scenario and there are some limitations where there's an important delay from the procedures assessment. And what we found was that it is possible to go from 311 procedures assessed with new indications to 1,204 in the case of applying partial reliance, and up to 3,000 in the case of doing comprehensive reliance. It's important to strengthen the technical capacities and also training of human talent that is involved in the procedure of regulatory procedures, considering that the sensitivity analysis showed that professional experience is determinant for savings and for the efficiency of the process. And I also want to mention that these savings would allow the agency to attend to the other needs that are pending. In the case of Colombia, there are some regulatory voids or gaps and professionals can invest their efforts in updating the regulations that obviously considering public health, but also they can invest efforts in doing post-sale surveillance that is more rigorous. So this is all, and thank you so much
Diego,
for your space.
muchas gracias a
Thank you,
vos y
Diego.
también a nuestros
Thank you
colegas de
so much
FIDRO,
to
la
you,
asociación local en Colombia, por
and
impulsar
also
esta
to our colleagues from
investigación.
the
Y
local
creo que estos
organizations in
datos
Colombia
son
for
fenomenales. Me atrevería a decir
boosting
que
this
únicos en el
organization.
mundo,
I think
o
these
al
are
menos en
phenomenal data.
América Latina. Así
They
que
are
gracias
unique in the world, or at least in Latin America. So thank you so much for
Quizá
such an
algunos de los
important effort.
asistentes se preguntan si la
And
totalidad
some
del
of the
estudio ya
attendees
está
are
disponible para
wondering if
consulta de los
the
interesados.
entire study is available. For the people concerned, we already have the final concept of the document of the exercise, and we're assessing the possibility of generating a
Muchas gracias por ello,
publication.
Diego. También
Thank you for
invitamos a
this,
tomar
Diego.
algunas
And we
preguntas de la
also invite
audiencia de
you
manera escrita
to
en
take
caso de
some
que tengan
questions
sobre esta
from the
investigación.
audience in
nuevo,
writing.
gracias por la generosidad de tu tiempo.
And thank you so
Y
much
también
for
a las
your
casi
generosity and your
400
time,
personas que nos han acompañado en
and
este
also to the
webinar.
almost 400
Gozadores,
people that
pasamos a
have
la última
been
parte de
here in this
este
2-hour
webinar, que es un
webinar with us.
panel de
We go to the
discusión,
final part of
perspectivas
the webinar, which is a
regionales
discussion
sobre el
panel on
reliance
regional
regulatorio y
perspectives
el
on
fortalecimiento de los
regulatory
sistemas
reliance and the
regulatorios.
strengthening
Este
of
panel será
regulatory systems.
moderado
This
por nuestra
panel will
estimada
be
colega
moderated
Camila Gómez, a quien
by
ya
our
conocieron
esteemed
en la
colleague
apertura.
Camila Gomez,
Ella es
that you already met
LATAM
in the
Regulatory
opening
Policy Lead
session.
en
She
Latinoamérica
is the
para
LATAM
Roche y
regulatory policy
coordinadora de
lead
la Latam
in Latin
Network
America
de
for Roche, and
EFPIA.
she's
Camila
coordinator
también tuvo
of the
una
LATAM network
destacada
of
carrera
EFPIA. She
en la
also had
Agencia
a very
Sanitaria del
important career
Brasil, Anvisa,
at
en el área de
the
asuntos
Health Agency
internacionales
in Brazil,
y
Anvisa
una
in
amplia
international
experiencia en
affairs,
salud
and
global
broad
y
experience in
política
global
regulatoria
health
para
and
incluir un
regulatory
componente muy
policy,
interesante en
to
esta
include a very interesting
discusión. Camila presentará también a los
component in this discussion.
distinguidos
Camila
panelistas que nos
will be
acompañan.
presenting
Cami, muchas
our
gracias por estar con nosotros.
distinguished
Adelante.
panelists that are going to be here with us. Thank you, Diego. I now invite the panelists also to turn on your cameras so that we can start with our discussion. Welcome. I have here today Dr. Daniel Sanchez, Executive Director of APSA in Ecuador. Welcome, Dr. Daniela Marreco, Director of the second Director of Anvisa. Welcome, Daniela. And my colleague Leonardo Semprum, who is the coordinator for regulatory of FIFARMA. So we are going to be starting our panel today. We're a bit late. So before, Diego, we are going to be presenting the questions on screen.
No, adelante,
No.
pueden adelante avanzar sin
Ok,
diapositivas.
muchas gracias. Entonces quería
Thank you
antes tal
so
vez
much.
de empezar
So before we
la jornada,
started
dar unos
with
breves
the
minutos
session,
para
I
la
wanted to
palabra, esta
give you
apertura
a few minutes
a
for the opening
nuestros
remarks
panelistas para que puedan saludar
to our
la
panelists so
audiencia
that
antes de
they
pasar
can greet
exactamente
the
a las preguntas
audience
y empezando
before
entonces
going to
por
the
el
questions.
doctor
And
Daniel.
let's start by Dr. Daniel.
Muy buenos días. Muchas gracias,
Good
Lidia. Muchas
morning.
gracias,
Thank
Diego.
you. Thank you
Gracias a
so
FIFARMA
much.
por
And
este
thank you,
espacio que
Diego.
definitivamente
Thank you to
enriquece
FIFARMA.
la cooperación
And
en materia
Enrique
regulatoria
is like
y
cooperation
abren la
in
puerta a
regulatory
nuevas
matters. And
oportunidades
this
que
opens the
benefician
door to new
definitivamente al
opportunities that
acceso y la
definitely
disponibilidad de
benefit the
medicamentos de gran
access and
calidad para
availability to
nuestros ciudadanos.
medications
Es con
of
ese
great
objetivo que
quality
nosotros
for
hemos
our
tomado
citizens.
las
And this
acciones
is
en
the reason
materia de
why we
Reliance,
take these
brindar
actions in terms
o
of
implementar
reliance
en Reliance una
to
oportunidad
provide or
de
protect reliance
acceso
as
con
an
garantía de la
opportunity
calidad
for
y sin duda
access with
alguna que no
guarantee
sea
for
un
quality,
mecanismo
and
únicamente de
undoubtedly
transferir
for it not to
decisiones,
be a
sino que sea
mechanism
un
to just
mecanismo
transfer decisions,
eficiente
but
y
for it
moderno
to be an
para
efficient
que
and
el
modern
conocimiento
mechanism
regulatorio global
so
esté
that global
para
regulatory
el
knowledge
beneficio de los
can be at
ecuatorianos.
the
Gracias.
benefit of Equatorians.
Gracias, doctor Daniel. Daniela.
Thank you, Dr. Daniela.
Olá, cumprimento a todas e a todos.
Hi,
Agradeço muito pelo convite para participar
I'm
desse
so
webinar,
thankful
desse
for
painel de
the
discussão.
possibility
A
to
Anvisa vem
participate in
implementando
this
as estratégias
webinar,
de Reliance
and
desde 2018 e
Anvisa
é muito
has been
importante
implementing
os
these
dados que
reliance
foram
strategies
compartilhados na
since
parte inicial desse
2018, and
webinar
it's
que
very
reforçam a importância
important to
dessa
have this
ferramenta
data that were
como uma
shared at the
ferramenta
beginning
de
of the webinar.
manutenção da
This
autonomia das
strengthens the
autoridades
tools
regulatórias e, ao mesmo tempo,
as
uma
a tool for
ferramenta de
maintenance
otimização
and
como foi
autonomy
apresentado tanto
of
de
the
custos quanto de
authorities,
tempo, e
and
no mundo
they
que a gente
appear
vive
as
cada
tools for
vez mais
use,
globalizado, se torna ainda mais
both for
importante. Então,
costs and
precisamos, por meio da confiança
also in a
regulatória,
world that
por
is
meio da
more and more
cooperação entre os
globalized. This becomes
países,
more and more
incentivar o
important
uso
as
dessa
well through
ferramenta de
regulatory
forma
trust and cooperation
responsável e
of
de
all
forma a
countries.
otimizar os
We
recursos das
can
agências
encourage the use
regulatórias, para
of
que a
this
gente
tool in
possa
a
nos
responsible manner
empenhar cada
for
vez mais na
optimization
análise de
of the
processos complexos, na
regulations
análise de demandas que requeram
so
foco
that we can
maior da
encourage this
agência. Então,
analysis a bit
eu
more.
reforço a importância dessa discussão
And this
e que a Anvisa
requires
venha
a
atualizando as
greater
regras
focus
de
on part of
reliance
the agency.
exatamente para
So
proporcionar uma
this
ampliação do
discussion is
uso dessa
very important.
ferramenta nas nossas
Anvisa
otimizações
wants to
regulatórias
provide the
e no
expansion
tratamento das
of the
nossas
use
vidas.
of this tool and our optimization
Muito obrigada,
so that we
Daniela.
can improve the
Daniela es una
treatment of our
pionera
patients.
del Reliance en nuestra región desde
And
hace
thank you
muchos
so much.
años, cuando
This
estaba
is
en el área de
this you have been very
medicamentos
important
del
for Reliance
niño.
in
Fue
our
una de las
region.
primeras que ha
She was one of the
invertido, sí,
first
en esta
persons to
estrategia. Y
invest
para
in
finalizar,
this
sus palabras de
strategy. And to
bienvenida,
close
Camila.
her these
Gracias, Camilo.
welcoming
Buenos días a
remarks,
todos. Bueno, para mí es un
Camila,
honor
thank you so
representar a
much.
FIFARMA
For me, it's an
en esta
honor to
conversación y
represent
poder compartir este
FIFARMA
espacio con
in this
colegas de Anvisa,
conversation
de
and be
LARSA.
able to share
Desde
this
nuestro grupo
space
de
with
trabajo
colleagues
hemos
from
venido
Anvisa, from LARSA,
trabajando y hemos
and from
tenido la
our
oportunidad
work
de
group. We
acompañar
have
de
been
cerca
working and
la
we've had the
evolución del Reliance
opportunity
en América
to
Latina,
support the
también en otras
evolution of
regiones,
Reliance in Latin
colaborando
America and
con
other
reguladores,
regions as
organismos
well,
multilaterales,
collaborating with
internacionales,
regulators and
academia, industria,
multilateral bodies and
promoviendo iniciativas que
academia
puedan
industry,
fortalecer los
promoting
sistemas
initiatives that can
regulatorios.
strengthen the
Creemos que
regulatory
realmente lo que
systems.
hace este
We
espacio
believe that
especialmente
what this space
relevante es
does
una conversación
and
en la
makes
que
it
Reliance se
especially
encuentra
relevant
en una
is a
etapa de
conversation in
creciente
which
madurez
Reliance
en
is
nuestra
at
región,
a
con
stage
experiencias
of
cada vez
growing
más concretas, como lo hemos
maturity in our
visto a lo
region with
largo de la
experiences
mañana
that
de
are
hoy,
more and more
que nos
concrete
permiten
that we have
reflexionar
seen
sobre
today, this
cuáles
morning,
son los
that
próximos
allows
pasos
to
para
reflect
poder
on what are the
continuar
next steps
fortaleciendo
to
la
be able to
colaboración
keep
regulatoria sólida. Espero
strengthening
que podamos
regulatory
compartir algunas
collaboration.
perspectivas
I
útiles de
hope
cómo
we
avanzar
can
juntos
share
en
certain
esta
useful
dirección. Gracias,
perspectives on
Camila.
how to advance together in this
Gracias. Entonces,
direction.
para
Thank you,
arrancar, tengo
Camila.
acá una
Thank you.
pregunta
So to
inicial
start, I have a
para
question, an
Anvisa,
initial question
sí,
for
relacionada a
Anvisa
que la OPS,
related to
la
the fact that
Organización Panamericana de la
PAHO
Salud, destaca que los sistemas
is
regulatorios
or highlights
robustos
that the
garantizan
regulatory or
este
robust
acceso que
regulatory
mencionaba
systems
también el doctor
guarantee
Daniel
this
a
access that
tecnologías
Dr.
sanitarias
Daniel
que
was
son
mentioning
seguras
to
y son
healthcare
también un
technologies
motor
that
para
are
la
safe
autosuficiencia
and
sanitaria
are
regional.
an
Sin
engine
embargo,
for
estos
regional
mismos datos
healthcare
indican que
self-sufficiency.
tres cuartas
However,
partes
these
de las
same figures show
naciones
that
latinoamericanas
3/4 of
y
the
del
Latin American
Caribe aún no
nations and in
alcanzan
the
este
Caribbean
nivel óptimo de desempeño,
still
¿sí?
haven't
Y,
reached
y
this
estos datos están
optimal
basados en la
level.
herramienta de
And
evaluación
these
global de
figures are
la
based
OMS, el
on the
GBT.
global assessment
Entonces, quería
tool
saber desde la
of
perspectiva de
WHO, and
Anvisa,
they want to know
ya que esto
from
evidencia que
Anvisa's
hay una
perspective
necesidad de elevar el
what
nivel de
is
madurez de las
the
autoridades en esta
evidence
región.
for
¿Cuáles
elevating the level of
serían los
maturity in the
elementos
region,
clave
and
para
which would
este
be the key
fortalecimiento de una
elements
agencia
for the
regulatoria en los
strengthening
países en
of a
desarrollo?
regulatory agency in countries under development?
Muito obrigada, Camila. Essa é uma
Thank you so
reflexão
much,
fundamental que
Camila.
você trouxe
This is
e eu
a
acho que ela toca
fundamental
no cerne da
reflection,
nossa missão enquanto uma autoridade de saúde
and
pública.
this comes
O
directly
diagnóstico realizado pela OPS ele é
aligned
muito
with
preciso.
our
A
mission
população sanitária ela
in public
deixou de
health.
ser apenas um
The
filtro ou
diagnosis
uma
done
etapa
by
burocrática
PAHO is
para se
very
consolidar,
specific.
na verdade, como um
It
motor,
stopped
um
being a
impulsionador
bureaucratic
da
filter stage
autossuficiência
to
tecnológica e da
consolidate
segurança
itself
sanitária de
as
qualquer
an
nação.
engine that
Aqui no
drives
Brasil,
technology and
enfrentar essa
surveillance
realidade tem sido uma
in
jornada
health
de
in
transformação.
Brazil. And
Atualmente, a Anvisa está
facing
imersa
this
em um
reality
processo
is a great
que é bastante
transformation
rigoroso de
currently,
avaliação da
and
ferramenta
Anvisa
de
is
avaliação
in a
global,
very
global
rigorous
benchmarking
process
tool, o
of the assessment process of the
GBT da
tool
OMS, né?
globally
E se
through
submeter a esse escrutínio internacional não é
NGPT, and
apenas a
also
busca por uma certificação ou pela
to
consolidação no nível mais
subject
alto de
themselves for
maturidade. Na
this national part
verdade,
is
é um
not just a
exercício
search
de
for a
transparência, de
consolidation at a
transformação
higher
institucional.
maturity level.
Então, nós
It's an
conseguimos, ao longo
exercise
desse
of
processo, olhar
transparency
para
and
as nossas
transformation,
próprias estruturas e
institutional
enfrentar
transformation. So we
desafios
have
como
to
restrições
look
orçamentárias
at our
históricas,
structures and
redução do tamanho
face
das nossas equipes
challenges
técnicas, né, em
like the
contraste com as
budget
demandas
and
crescentes
also
que nós
the
recebemos, a
reduction
necessidade constante
of
de
our
modernização
staff, growing
tecnológica
demands
e
that we've we've received the constant need for technological transformation and also the pressure on the exponential growth of demands with technologies. And regardless of all of these challenges, the process for certification of GPT is also a catalyzer for our internal growth that
processos com base
has
em risco e
helped our
otimizar
quality
ainda mais
health
o uso dos
system,
nossos
helping us
recursos.
standardize
E aí, por fim,
processes
eu
based on
destaco
risk and to
alguns
optimize the use of
elementos-chave
our
que
resources.
nós temos
And to
aprendido ao longo
close,
desse
I
processo de
also want to
avaliação e aprimoramento
highlight
do GPT
something that
para
we
elevar
learned
o
a
nosso
lot
nível de maturidade.
along
E eu
this
acho que tudo isso está focado em
process
4
by
pilares
using the tool
inegociáveis.
of
Primeiro, a
ChatGPT
autonomia
that is
institucional
focused
com uma
on
base legal
4 pillars
sólida,
that are
um
non-negotiable:
sistema de gestão da qualidade
institutional
robusto e
autonomy,
também
a
um
solid
processo de
legal
capacitação
basis,
contínua em prol do aprimoramento
the
desse sistema de gestão da
quality
qualidade, a
management
convergência
basis that is also
regulatória e as
stronger,
práticas de
and
Reliance
the
e também todo o
continuous training
mecanismo de
process in
atualização
quality management and
regulatória entre as
regulatory parts
diferentes
and practices
autoridades
of Reliance,
tributárias. E,
and
por
also
fim, eu
regulatory
cito a
harmonization
digitalização
among the
e a
different
transparência guiada por
institutions
dados, que nós
or of
possamos, sim,
health, and
fazer
also
essa atuação com base na ciência,
transparency
com base em dados que
guided
sejam
by data.
compartilhados, que sejam
We do
transparentes e
this
cada vez
based
mais
on science
nesse
in
ambiente,
shared
nesse
and
mundo
transparent
digital.
data for
Então,
them to be
esse
much more
fortalecimento da
used in this
regulação
digital
regulatória nas
environment.
Américas,
This
né, não é
strengthening
uma corrida individual,
of
mas
the
sim um
regulatory
esforço
part in the
coletivo de todas
Americas
as
is
autoridades
not
sanitárias para
an
buscar
individual race,
essa
but it is
capacitação, essa
a
harmonização
collective
e essa maior
effort for
convergência
us to be
regulatória.
able to find this training
Muito
harmonization and
obrigada,
regulatory
Daniela. Muchas
convergence.
gracias.
Thank you
Realmente
so much,
hay un
Daniela.
poder
Thank you.
transformador
Thank you so
en la
much.
implementación del LGBT.
And
Vemos
there
eso en
is a
muchas de
transformative
las
power in the
autoridades de
implementation
nuestra
of
región.
GBT and
Y pasando
also here in
ahora,
our
tal
region.
vez
And
para un
now
aspecto un poco más
going
práctico de este
to
mundo de
a
cosas
more
que se hacen,
practical
que la LGBT
aspect
también nos
of all these
invita
things that
a la
are
implementación de
done
las
in
vías
that
de Reliance.
GBT
Sí,
also invites us
pasamos al
to
doctor Daniel,
looking at
porque sabemos que
Reliance,
la
and
AXA
we
ha
go to
sido una
Dr.
de las
Daniel because
autoridades
we
de la
know
región
that
que ha
AXA has
avanzado
been
mucho
one of the
en
authorities in the
la
region that has
implementación de
advanced
estos
a
mecanismos
lot
de Reliance.
in the
Entonces, quería
implementation of
invitarle
these
a compartir con
Reliance
nuestra
mechanisms.
audiencia cómo ha
So I
sido la
wanted to invite
experiencia
you to
de
share
la
with the
agencia
audience
ecuatoriana,
what the
tanto
experience of
para
the
nuevas
Ecuadorian agency has been
autorizaciones
like,
de
both for
comercialización, pero
new
también para otras
authorizations
funciones
and
regulatórias, porque
commercialization,
Reliance es
but
muy
also for
evidente
other
para
regulatory
las
roles,
autorizaciones
because
de
Reliance is
comercialización, pero,
very evident
hay un
for
historial de
these
Reliance también para
authorizations.
otras
But there
funciones
is a
regulatórias,
history
como
of
las
Reliance,
inspecciones, ¿sí?
um,
De buenas prácticas
like
de
for things like
manufactura,
inspections
también
of good
para evaluación y
manufacturing
aprobación de
practices,
protocolos de
and also for
vigilancia
assessment and
clínica, ¿sí?
approval
Entonces, quería
of
saber
clinical
si
research
la AXA ha
protocols.
observado
And I also
casos
wanted to know if
concretos,
you've
cuáles han sido
observed
las
um,
eficiencias
concrete
regulatorias,
cases
si
would
se han
have been the
optimizado sus
regulatory
recursos y
efficiencies,
si
if
es
you have
posible,
optimized your resources.
si usted
So
podría
if it's
compartir algunos
possible, if you
datos o
could share
indicadores de esos
maybe some
resultados
data or
para
indicators
evidenciar
of
este
these
avance.
results to show evidence of this progress.
Muchas gracias, Camila. Definitivamente la
Thank you so much,
experiencia de
Camila.
AXA ha sido sumamente
Definitely, the
positiva,
experience
al mismo
at
tiempo que
AXA has
también
been
nos ha
very,
abierto
very
las
positive.
puertas a
There
que
was some
nuestro
time
fortalecimiento
that it has
institucional
also opened the
esté
doors
enfocado
so
en
that
nuestro
our
propio
institutional
modelo de
strengthening can be
institución,
focused on our
acreditar
main
nuestro nivel de madurez
goal as
ante
an
la
institution,
Organización
accredit our
Mundial de la
level
Salud.
of
Es por
maturity
ello que
before
a
the World
mediados
Health Organization.
2025, nosotros
That's
como
why
parte
in
del
the middle
proceso
of
de
2025,
modernización
as
regulatoria,
part of a
ejecutamos
regulatory
acciones en
modernization
nuestras
process,
normas
we
nacionales, tanto de
executed actions
medicamentos de uso
in our
general
national
como de
norms, both
medicamentos
for
biológicos,
general use
para el
medications as
reconocimiento
well as
formal del
biologicals, for
Reliance
the
como
formal
un
recognition
mecanismo de
of
acceso
reliance
oportuno
as a
al
mechanism
momento de
of
obtener
timely access
un
in the
registro
moment
sanitario
of
ecuatoriano.
obtaining
En el
an Ecuadorian
proceso de
health
homologación,
registration.
antes estaba
The
dado
process
de
for
forma
homologation used to
unilateral,
happen in a
exclusivamente limitado a los
unilateral manner,
productos inherentes al
exclusively
Cuadro Básico
limited
Nacional de
to products
Medicamentos.
inherent to the
Nosotros en este tema
basic
vimos una oportunidad, no cerrar
national
únicamente a los
medication
productos del Cuadro Básico, sino
group.
ampliarlo
And we don't
a todos
want
los
to close this
medicamentos de
only
uso
to the
general
basic group
y
of medications,
también
but
a
expand it to
medicamentos
all general
biológicos.
use medications and
Este es
also
un
to
proceso que se ha
biologicals.
desarrollado de
And
manera
this
progresiva
process
y ha
that has
permitido
been done in
incorporar
a
mecanismos
progressive way
en
has allowed
determinadas
us to
actividades
incorporate mechanisms
regulatorias.
in
Sin embargo,
specific
en esta
regulatory
primera etapa
activities.
estamos
However,
enfocados en
in
ser
this first
muy
stage, we
eficientes
are
en torno
focused
a
on
las
being
autorizaciones
very
de
efficient around
comercialización.
the
Al mismo
authorizations
tiempo,
for
esta acción
commercialization, and
nos
at the
permite
same time,
fortalecer nuestra
this
capacidad
action allows
institucional,
us to
sobre todo las
strengthen our
competencias
institutional capacity,
técnicas de nuestro
especially
talento
the
humano,
technical
para
competencies
volvernos,
of our
como bien lo
human
refería
talent,
hace un momento,
to
más
become, as I said, more efficient in the issuance of these registries, and this also allows us to be able to dynamize and focus our work on the other regulatory competencies that we have. And undoubtedly, regulatory sovereignty and regulatory trust are not terms that are opposite to each other. Sovereignty and trust go hand in hand when we want to build a modern and effective regulatory system and that is closer to the needs of citizens that trust our work. And in the implementation of this reliance mechanism for recognition in 2026, with this opening, we've had certain approvals, and our norm has something that's very specific. It was definitely an important challenge that we set ourselves as an institution. So all approvals that go in through the reliance mechanisms are general, they can be general use medications or biologicals, should not have a time of approval above 90 days. This for us is a milestone at the regional level because we're establishing maximum time for approval in the application of this recognition mechanism. And that's how, at the moment, close to 30% of healthcare registries and biologicals that have come in the past few months have opted to go in through the reliance mechanism. We've met with the terms established biologicals that used to be able to have a registry from 6 months to a year or more. They've obtained them through the access to regulatory trust and good regulatory practices, as you were saying, also considered in the GP tool that make it that 30% of products can have health registry in less than 90 days. This for us, for the industry, also trying to retake trust in institutions, as this opens the doors to being able to have better strengths for citizens to be able to have more access. And this progress definitely has a very important lesson, and it's the fact that we as a regulating agency need to understand that never or no agency in the world will be able to build a regulatory mechanism that facilitates access and guarantees safety for citizens in an isolated manner. The construction of regulatory mechanisms needs to be done in a coordinated and safe manner with collective cooperation, but especially being efficient in the recognition of regulatory authorities that have done analysis fully and make sure that the medications that are going to be of access for our citizens can have the quality and efficacy and safety that we need in our country. So we've gone from a system that used to work, but with a completely different dynamic in a limited manner, in a specific manner for a group of medications that was not very much used by the industry, to a much more dynamic system with times that are fully established. And at the end of the day, this is what the industry needs: predictability, to know that their product will have an approval in a maximum time. And once they have all the requirements, and the time is 90 days. And these are aspects that strengthen our credibility both with citizens as well as with the industry. Thank you. Perfect. One thing that we tend to say is that the mechanism doesn't matter. Uh, an authority that seeks efficiency, more efficiency is more efficiency for everyone. So before going into these points related to collaboration, I maybe want to hand the floor to Leonardo, my colleague from the industry, to respond in regards to this symmetry that we see. And in this scenario, Reliance helps prevent the duplication of efforts, because nowadays duplicating efforts and reassessing products that have already been reassessed by a reference agency is a luxury that is not sustainable for public health. If we look at all the things that our regulatory organizations need to do. So, Leo, from the perspective of the industry, how do you prioritize decisions and manage these limited resources at the same time that we maintain the high levels of quality and safety and efficacy? And then how to decide what this works for and what's the level of reliance that can be applied. Thank you, Cami. This point is very important. This is something that the industry has focused on, working jointly with the regulatory agencies. And I think that the starting point that we've talked about it this morning is that Reliance, additional from being an efficiency tool, is also a tool for regulatory strengthening that is risk-based. And Daniel was mentioning, Bailarza, even the most mature agencies cannot do it themselves alone, because the question is related to how to use Reliance where it can generate greater value for patients and regulatory systems. So from our perspective, agencies need to focus resources on the roles where we contribute a greater value, meaning taking advantage of assessments done by reliable reference authorities, like meaning world listed authorities, for activities that have already been assessed for these standards. And we know that at the agency's level of resources, additional to the budget that is limited, the resources that we're lacking most is specialized regulatory talent. So under this optic, Reliance will allow us to use this talent in a more strategic manner, focusing the efforts in pharmacosurveillance, risk management, market surveillance, more concretely on the question, the evidence that we've seen in Latin America and other regions, even much more mature agencies, is that Reliance have been broadly used in the authorization for commercialization, variations per registries and clinical studies and GMP pressures. However, the level of reliance also always needs to be proportional to the risk and complexity of product, of course, the capacity of the regulatory agency. There's additional benefit that we believe is very important. It's related to regulatory predictability. When there's these clear criteria on how and when to use Reliance, we can generate procedures that are much more consistent, much more predictable for all stakeholders without this compromising quality and safety, and as we've mentioned, the regulatory sovereignty of the products. So it's about like strengthening the system with a
Graças, Léo,
risk-based
muito
focus.
importante
Thank you,
este
Leo. This is
enfoque
very
e
important.
realmente isso é o que
This
a
focus is
OMS
very
estuda,
important.
a
And
questão do
this is what
reliance
um,
informado,
the
reliance
WHO
inteligente.
is saying, that it's informed
Queria
reliance,
volver ao
intelligent
ponto que
reliance.
já
I
todos
wanted to go back to the
mencionaram
point
da
that everybody
colaboração,
mentioned
especialmente no
on
enfoque
the
de elaborações
collaboration,
regionais. Esse é um
especially
evento
regional collaboration.
latino-americano. Então, vocês queria
This
talvez
is a Latin American event. So
perguntar à Anvisa
I wanted
e
to
também
ask
à
Anvisa
FIFARMA
and
respecto a
also
uma recente
FIFARMA about
iniciativa que foi a firma de la
a recent
Declaración
initiative
de
that was a
Rio, a la que
signing of the Rio
también ya se
Declaration
unió. Si esta
that
declaración es
AXA already joined as well.
compromiso
And if these
de vários
declarations
reguladores de
are
nuestra
a commitment
región
from
para
several
estrechar
regulators from our
cooperación
region
técnica y promover
to
esta
tighten
confianza
technical
mutua.
cooperation and
Sí,
promote this
entonces quería
mutual
saber
trust. So I wanted to know
que oportunidades y qué
what
desafíos
opportunities, what
entonces esta
challenges
nueva visión de integración regional
are
plantea y si
shown by this
también
new regional integration
Daniela y
vision.
Leonardo pueden comentar
And
desde la
also
perspectiva de
Daniela and
reguladores, la
Leonardo can
perspectiva de la
comment on
industria
the
sobre el
perspective
rol
of regulators or
específico
the
de sus
industry about
organizaciones
the
en este
specific
contexto.
role of
Entonces,
their organizations
Daniela.
in this context. So Daniela,
Muito obrigada, Camila, pela
thank you,
excelente provocação.
Camila, for the
Eu acho
excellent
que o
question.
cenário
And
geopolítico e as emergências recentes que
I
nós
think that
enfrentamos, com
the
certeza, nos
geopolitical
deixaram uma
scenario
lição importante. O
is
isolamento
something that
regulatório,
we're
ele não é mais uma
facing.
opção viável,
It
né? Ele
leaves us
pode
with
representar
important
um próprio
information. The
risco à saúde
regulatory part is
pública
not
e à soberania
just a viable
tecnológica dos
option. It can
países. E é
present
dessa premissa
a
que
huge
surge
risk on
a
public health
Declaração do Rio
and
de Janeiro, que
technological
trata de
sovereignty for
confiança
the
e de
countries.
cooperação
And
regulatória.
here is where we
Da
have
parte da Anvisa, quando nós
this
assinamos esse documento,
regulation of
juntamente com
Rio de
nações
Janeiro.
parceiras como
On part of
Chile,
Anvisa, when
Colômbia
we
e
signed this
Cuba,
document,
México, Paraguai e
jointly with
Panamá, não
partners like
estávamos
Chile,
apenas
Colombia,
firmando
Cuba,
um
Mexico,
protocolo
Paraguay,
diplomático,
Panama,
mas sim estabelecendo um
we
marco de
weren't just
confiança
signing a
mútua na
protocol,
cooperação
a
técnica
diplomatic
na América
protocol.
Latina,
It was a
cujo objetivo
mutual
central
trust
dessa
framework in
declaração do
technical
Rio de
cooperation
Janeiro
in Latin
é
America
criar as
with
bases
a
para a
central
convergência de
objective.
processos
With
regulatórios,
this
claro que
declaration of Rio de
respeitando
Janeiro, it's about
as
creating
competências de
a
cada
basis for
nação, mas também
regulatory processes,
garantindo que trabalhemos
respecting the
pautados na boa-fé
competencies of each
institucional, nas
nation,
boas
but
práticas e,
guaranteeing that
acima de
we
tudo,
work,
em
we're
evidências
going to
científicas.
work together with
Falando um
good
pouquinho também de
practices and
oportunidades,
that are
a integração
evidence-based,
regional
and talking a
e
little bit
Reliance
about
estão
opportunities.
previstos na
The
declaração,
regional
como eu tinha
declaration
colocado
and
antes, eles nos
Reliance
permitem
are
otimizar
planned in
recursos,
this
tanto técnicos
declaration. As
quanto
I've mentioned, this
financeiros, e os
allows us
dados que
to
foram
optimize
apresentados no
resources,
início do
both
webinar foram
technical
muito
and
interessantes
financial,
também, porque
and the
reforçam
data
ainda mais
presented at the
essa
start of this
otimização,
webinar
né?
were
Considerando
very
que nenhum
interesting
país
because
tem
this
capacidade de
reinforces
avaliar
the optimization,
isoladamente e com a velocidade necessária todas as
where no
inovações que o
country
mercado
has the
global nos
capacity
apresenta.
to assess all the innovations that the global market presents in an isolated manner. And talking about this, when we share information and these reports and practical knowledge, we can advance in safer and more effective approvals in our health system and the development of productive regional capacity. And this way, we can prepare ourselves much more quickly and in a coordinated manner for future public health emergencies. We also know that there are a lot of challenges related the implementation of the proposed actions, mainly the geopolitical part that is very fragmented and in technological advances that are very rapid. We have to level the regulating aspect of our region. So in this sense, the declaration calls us to work in regional symmetry for the environment to be much more harmonic and much more convergent in regards to the regulatory requirements in the assessment of
Obrigada,
new
Camila.
health
E antes de
technologies.
passar para que Léo pueda comentar, solo
Thank you
comentar que
so
sigue
much.
creciendo, sí, el número de
And
firmantes de
we
la
need to keep
declaración.
growing.
Adheriron
After signing the
AXA,
declarations,
El
we have
Salvador y
AXA, El
recién
Salvador,
también la semana pasada. Sí, es una
and
alegría
recently,
verlas.
last week, it's
Entonces,
a joy
Leonardo,
to
¿puedes
see
darnos
this.
comentar desde las
Leonardo,
perspectivas de la industria?
I want to show you our perspectives of the industry.
Sí,
I
perfecto.
can
Ok.
hear you. Yes.
Bueno, de lo que hemos podido conocer, ¿no?
Of what
Lo que
we've
está en
been
el estado
able
del
to
arte, pero también
learn about what's
en
in the
diferentes
state of the
intercambios
art,
que hemos
but also
sostenido
different
también con
exchanges
la
that we've
agencia
held
de Brasil,
with
Anvisa.
the
Creemos que esta
Brazil
declaración es
agency
importante
Anvisa.
porque refleja
We
una
believe that
visión
this
sobre
declaration
mayor
is important because
colaboración,
it
una visión
reflects
compartida,
a
y
vision
creo
on
que allí
greater
estamos
collaboration, a
en
shared
acuerdo en
vision.
una mayor
I think we're
colaboración
here in agreements
regulatoria
with a
que es
greater
posible en América Latina,
regulatory
reconociendo
coordination, which
cuáles
is
son
possible
los
in Latin
desafíos
America,
actuales, ¿no? que requieren cada
recognizing
vez
which
más
are the current
cooperación entre
challenges that
autoridades
require
regulatorias, ¿no?
more and more
No vamos a
cooperation
ir
between
nuevamente al
regulatory
ejemplo de la
authorities.
pandemia, pero ya
We're
todos
not
sabemos
going
que
to
eso
go to the
es un
example of the
punto
pandemic, but
interesante
we
para
know that
reflexionar.
this is an important point to
Creemos que
reflect.
la gran oportunidad
And
para la
we
región es
believe
poder
that the
avanzar
great
en
opportunity
convergencia
for the
regulatoria,
region is to
poder
be able
fortalecer
to
las capacidades
advance in
técnicas,
regulatory
poder construir
convergence and be able
confianza,
to
aprender
strengthen technical skills and
tomar
build
las lecciones
trust
aprendidas
and
entre
take
otras
the
agencias y
lessons
poder
learned
traducir ese, por supuesto, en
between other agencies. And
decisiones
this can,
regulatorias
of
que sean
course, be
más
translated
eficientes, poder
into regulatory
utilizar de forma
decisions
más
that are more
racional
efficient
los
to be able
recursos
to
y
use
tener,
this
en última instancia,
resources in a more
y lo menos
rational manner
importante, el acceso oportuno de los
and have
pacientes
a
a los
timely
medicamentos.
access to patients
Al mismo tiempo,
uh,
también
to
desde FIFARMA
medications.
reconocemos que hay
And
desafíos
also from
importantes en América
FIFARMA, we
Latina, y uno de
recognize
ellos
that
sigue
there's
siendo que es
important
una región
challenges for
diversa
Latin
en
America. And
términos
one is
de
that
los
it's a
marcos
diverse
regulatorios
region
actuales, niveles de
in terms
madurez,
of the
capacidad
current regulatory
institucional,
frameworks, levels of
y por ello
maturity,
creemos que la
institutional capacity.
confianza,
And
¿no?
therefore, we believe that
Vista como el
trust,
acto de confiar
seen
a
like
nivel
the act
regulatorio,
of
se
trusting
construye a partir de
at
estas
regulatory
experiencias
level,
prácticas de
is
colaboración,
built
intercambio
based
técnico
on
y
these
aprendizaje
practical
mutuo. O sea, por
collaboration,
ejemplo, yo si
experiences, and
tengo un
technical
daño, una avería
exchange
en mi
and
auto,
mutual
lo puedo
learning. If
llevar a un
my car
centro
is damaged, I'm
especializado, a
going
un
to take it to
centro
a
de
specialized
reparación que yo confíe,
center
¿no?
for
De la misma
repair that
manera,
I trust.
digamos, para ponerlo de una manera
Um,
práctica,
so to put
funciona
this in a
la
practical
confianza.
matter,
Entonces, desde
trust
FIFARMA,
works.
nuestro rol
So from
también,
FIFARMA, our
o cómo lo
role
vemos,
is
es poder actuar
also,
como un puente
or the way that
regional,
we see it
que
is how to
podamos
be able to
ayudar a
act as a
conectar las
regional bridge
experiencias, poder generar
that we can
evidencia,
help connect experiences
compartir
and
la evidencia
generate
que ya tenemos,
evidence
facilitar espacios
and
de
share
diálogo
the
y
evidence
poder
that we have
apoyar
and
con herramientas
facilitate
prácticas
dialogue
que permitan
spaces
esta
and be able
implementación
to
de manera
support with
más consistente
practical tools
y
that
también que
allow
esto
this
esté alineado con
implementation
los principios
in a more
generales
consistent
la
manner so
OMS.
that this is allowed
También creemos
aligned with the reliance
es
principles of
importante que el
the
proceso sea
WHO. So we
participativo,
also believe it's important
incluidas
for
las
processes to be
consultas
participatory,
públicas, intercambio
meaning all
técnico
public
entre los reguladores,
consultations,
la
technical
industria,
exchanges among
academia, organismos
regulators,
internacionales, que son
industry,
fundamentales para poder
academia,
construir
international bodies that
soluciones
are
que sean
fundamental to be able
sostenibles
to
en el
build
tiempo, que sean
solutions that are
adaptadas a la realidad de
sustainable
cada
in
país.
time, that
Entonces,
are adapted to the
para
realities of each
concluir
of the
esta
countries.
pregunta,
So to
consideramos que
close
esta confianza
this question, we
por sí
consider
sola,
that this trust on
o
its
esta
own,
experiencia internacional por sí sola, no
this
es
international
suficiente.
experience on
Necesitamos una
its own,
implementación
is not
exitosa que
enough,
requiera de
and we
criterios
need
claros,
successful
procesos
implementation that
transparentes,
requires
expectativas
clear
predecibles para
criteria,
todos, ¿no?
transparent processes, and predictable
Gracias, Leo. Entonces,
expectations
en
for
este
all actors.
sentido,
Thanks, Leo.
quería
So in this
preguntar
sense, I wanted
a
to
la AXA
ask
si miramos entonces esa parte de
AXA if we
colaboración
look
regional y el
at
Reliance,
regional
si
collaboration
pueden
and
compartir un
reliance,
poco cuáles han sido
if you
algunos
can
de los
share
retos
what have been
en
some
esta
of the
implementación por
challenges
AXA
in
y
this
cómo la
implementation
colaboración con otras
and
autoridades
how the
regulatorias en esta
collaboration with
región y
our
también con
regulatory
organismos
authorities in
internacionales
the
ha ayudado
region
a superar
and international bodies
estos
have helped
obstáculos y cuáles
overcome
son
these obstacles.
So,
What are also the main opportunities in this context to be able to keep expanding the use of regulatory reliance in the region in the coming years?
el fortalecer las acciones de
Strengthening
cooperación en
the
materia
actions
de
of
regulación
cooperation
definitivamente plantean
in
un futuro muy
regulation
promisorio
definitely
para las
states a
acciones que
very
tenemos que hacer como autoridades
promising future for
como
the
agencias
actions that we
reguladoras.
need to do
Las nuevas
as regulatory
tecnologías, mecanismos
agencies.
de
New
globalización
technologies,
desafían que la
globalization
cooperación
mechanisms
regulatoria sea cada
say
día
that
más
regulatory
fundamental dentro de las
comparison
autoridades
is
regulatorias.
more and more
Todos estos
fundamental within
desafíos
the
son parte
regulatory
de la
authorities, and all of
acción
these challenges
regulatoria moderna.
are part of
Desde
the
nuestra
modern
perspectiva,
regulatory
la
action. From
cooperación
our
regulatoria
perspective,
básicamente
regulatory
constituye un elemento
cooperation
esencial
basically
para
constitutes
fortalecer cada
an
una de las
essential
capacidades
element to
institucionales que
strengthen
nosotros
each
tenemos,
one
promover el
of the
intercambio de
institutional
conocimiento y
capacities that we
avanzar hacia
have,
sistemas
like
regulatorios
knowledge exchange,
mucho
and
más
advance towards
eficientes
regulatory systems
y
that are much
seguros
more
para los ciudadanos.
efficient and safe
Realmente para
for
ARSA, las
citizens.
principales
For
oportunidades
ARSA,
y para la región definitivamente durante
these
los
are
últimos
opportunities and also
años
for the
se
region.
encuentran en este
In the past few
fortalecimiento
years,
de la
that
confianza
we're
entre
in the
autoridades
strengthening of
regulatorias que se
trust
plasma
between
actualmente,
regulatory
como lo mencionaba, con el
authorities,
Acuerdo de Río que
as you were
hemos
mentioning,
suscrito
with the
hace pocas
Rio
semanas,
agreement
y también
that we
encontrar el
subscribed
desarrollo
to a few
de
weeks
esta
ago, and also
aplicación de
finding
Reliance en
the
nuevas
development of
áreas
this application of
en torno a
reliance
todas
in
nuestras
new
capacidades institucionales.
areas around all
Desde
of
nuestra
our institutional
experiencia podemos
capacities. And from
compartirle a
our
los países
experience, we
de la
can
región
share
que
with the
esta
countries in
es
the
para
region
nosotros una
that
herramienta
this
fundamental
is
para
to
la
us
construcción
a
de un
fundamental
ecosistema
tool
regulatorio
for
más
the
colaborativo, pero sobre todo que nos permite
creation of a more
aprovechar de mejor manera
regulated
todas estas acciones
system, and that
de
allows us to
cooperación
take
regional
better
que ya
advantage of all
existieron.
regional
Claro, sin duda
cooperation
alguna,
actions
sin
that exist
renunciar a
already.
nuestras
Of
competencias,
course,
capacidades y
without
responsabilidades regulatorias,
ignoring our
pero también
competencies or
respondiendo a
capacities
los
in
desafíos
regulations, but
que
also
el mundo nos
responding to the
pone y que la
challenges that
Organización
the
Mundial
world
de la Salud y
poses,
la Organización
and that the
Panamericana de la Salud
WHO
han
and
promovido de
PAHO
manera
have
creciente en materia
promoted
de
in a
cooperación
growing manner
y
in
la
terms
implementación de
of
estos
cooperation
instrumentos
and the
para
implementation
fortalecer
of these instruments to be
nuestros
able to
sistemas regulatorios
strengthen
como un
our
paso hacia
regulatory
la
systems as a
eficiencia, hacia el
step
acceso oportuno a nuevas
towards
tecnologías
efficiency,
sanitarias
towards timely
y
access to new
enfocado en
healthcare
poder
technologies, and also
brindarles
focused
mejores
on being
oportunidades,
able to
tanto
provide
nuestro talento
better
humano
opportunities both to our human
y
talent
también
as
al
well
acceso a los
as
ciudadanos. Definitivamente para
to
nosotros
the access
esta
to
acción
citizens. And
representa
definitely
parte
for
del
us,
futuro de la
this action
construcción de una
represents part of the
regulación
future of the
moderna para nuestro
construction of
país,
a
pero
modern
sobre todo
regulation for our
una
country, but
puerta
especially
hacia un
a
sistema de
door
salud mucho
towards
más fuerte y
a
eficiente con las
much
lecciones
stronger and
aprendidas
much
que
more
nos dejó la pandemia
efficient health
y una
system,
tendencia
with the lessons
creciente hacia la
learned from the
creación de
pandemic and a
mecanismos
growing trend towards
regulatorios
the
de
adaptation
cooperación.
of a
Ecuador
regulatory
y la región
mechanisms
no
for
pueden
cooperation.
quedarse atrás
Ecuador
en
and the
esta
region
acción,
cannot stay
debemos
behind in this
liderar
action.
a
We
nivel
need to
regional y por
lead
ello
this at
hemos tomado
regional
estas acciones
level,
concretas
and
que
we have therefore
definitivamente nos
taken these
ponen
concrete
en el
actions
futuro
that
regulatorio que el
definitely
país y la región necesitan.
say in the that put us in the regulatory future that the country and the region
Para
needs.
finalizar
Okay,
nuestro
to
panel
close
muy rico
our
de
panel,
informaciones y quería decir a
um,
los que han hecho
I
algunas
wanted
preguntas que
to
vamos a hacer el esfuerzo
say
de
that
tomar
there's been
algunas
a
de
few
ellas
questions that we will
offline
make the effort to take a couple of them
publicarlas,
offline
sí, porque no vamos a tener tiempo
and post them, because
para
we're not
borrar
going to be able
todas.
to have
Quería
time
tal vez
to
para
delete all
finalizar
of them.
invitar cada
And
uno
maybe
en
to
30
close, I wanted
segundos,
to invite each one of you in 30
en 30
seconds
segundos
only,
para hacer un
30
deseo, ¿sí?
seconds
Imaginen que yo soy un genio de la
to make a wish.
lámpara, ¿sí?
Imagine
Pero
that
solo
I
tomo
am a
deseos
genie with a
regulatorios, entonces
lamp, but I
no
only
tengo
take
mandato
regulatory
para más allá del
wishes. I have no
regulatorio.
mandate for
Entonces me
anything else
gustaría
beyond
pedir una
regulatory.
cosa, cuando
So if
miran
you
al
could ask for
futuro,
one
¿qué
thing looking towards the
sería
future,
y por qué?
what would that
Entonces
be
empiezo
and why?
con
So I
Daniela,
want
por
to
favor.
start with Daniela, please.
Obrigada, Camila. Eu pensei em
Thank you so much,
vários
Camila.
pedidos
I was thinking about
fazer,
several
mas falando de
several
pedido
requests and
regulatório, eu acho
wishes,
que o que a Anvisa mais
but
precisa nesse momento
talking about
é
regulatory, I
fortalecimento
think that
da
what
nossa
Anvisa needs the
capacidade
most
operacional.
right now
E eu
is
não
the
sei se esse
strengthening
pedido se enquadra num
of
pedido regulatório,
operating capacity.
mas focando em
I don't
pedido
know
que com
if
certeza
this
sim é regulatório, que a gente
helps
possa
for
trabalhar
regulatory
juntos e usando
or not, but
essas ferramentas
it's
que está
more of a
disponível, o
regulatory
próprio
wish
GBT,
so that we
a
can learn
própria Declaração do Rio de
a lot
Janeiro como
using the tools
instrumentos
like
e
the
ferramentas para
declaration
fortalecer
of
o
Rio as as instruments and tools to strengthen reliance and the application of regulatory trust at global level so that we can advance in our countries for the optimization and guarantee access of people to
Obrigada,
quality products
Daniel.
in a much better way. Thank
Bueno,
you so much.
a la genia de los deseos. Para nosotros,
Okay, to the
si bien
wish
el mecanismo en
genie.
Reliance no es únicamente un mecanismo de
So
optimización de
while
tiempos,
Reliance
sino un
mechanism
mecanismo
is
de
not just
fortalecimiento
a
institucional,
mechanism for time,
sin duda alguna, sería
the
que estos mecanismos de cooperación
wish would be that these mechanisms for reliance can have a greater number of concrete actions by all the regulatory authorities. So while we've been talking about the alliance for years, definitely having greater access to information from all environments, both for us who are in countries that are promoting their accreditation like us, we're in the accreditation stage in our regulatory capacities, but also the countries that currently have or have been cataloged by the World Health Organization as a high surveillance agency, and being able to have greater openness to information that really guarantees that this cooperation, this bilateral cooperation, can generate greater and better results. For example, real and timely access to public assessment reports. This would be a specific role that we would like to have in the future. We are expanding our actions in terms of cooperation, but we wish that all the countries will align to the same dynamic so that this cooperation can have greater concrete actions in favor of global health.
Leo.
Bueno, me toca a
Perfect.
mí. Si pudiera pedir un deseo, sería que América Latina
So
logre
if
consolidar
I
una
could
verdadera
make a
comunidad
wish, it would be
regulatoria
that Latin America is able to
regional
consolidate
basada en esta
a good
confianza, en esta
regional regulatory
colaboración.
community based on this
Sabemos que
trust and
los desafíos que
collaboration.
enfrentamos hoy son
We know
demasiado
that the
complejos,
challenges
son
that we face
geopolíticos,
today are
son
very complex. They are
necesidades crecientes
geopolitical.
de salud
They
pública,
are
tienen
growing
que ver
needs
con
in public
resiliencia de las
health.
cadenas de
They're
suministro,
related to the
una ciencia
resiliency
que
in
cada día
supply
avanza
chains
mucho más.
and
Y
the
para
science that
abordarlos de manera
advances more and
aislada,
more every day.
no
And to
tendríamos los
address this in an
resultados
isolated
que
manner,
quisiéramos. Entonces, es importante aprovechar mejor
we
el
wouldn't be able
conocimiento,
to
la
have the results
experiencia,
that
las
we would like.
capacidades
So
que
it's
ya
better to take
existen en
advantage
nuestra región y a nivel
of
global
knowledge and
para construir sistemas
experience.
que sean sólidos, que sean eficientes, que estén
And
preparados
this is
para
to build
responder a las
systems that
necesidades de
are
los
solid and
pacientes. Y al
efficient
final, el
and
mayor beneficio de
prepared
la colaboración es
to
para
respond
ellos,
to the
que
needs of the
esperan un
patients. And at
acceso
the end, the
oportuno
greater
a la
benefit for
innovación
collaboration is
científica.
to them that get timely
Gracias.
access to
Mi deseo
scientific
es que
innovation.
los deseos de
Thank you.
ustedes
And my
se
wish
conviertan
is
en
that all of
realidad.
your wishes
Sí,
become a
muchas gracias por
reality.
haber participado
Thank
con
you so
nosotros en esta
much for
pequeña
having
discusión de hoy.
participated
Y paso la
in this new
palabra al
discussion
Padre
today, and I hand
para
the
el
floor
cierre del
to
evento.
Diego for the
Gracias.
closing of the
Muchas
event.
gracias,
Thank you.
Cami. Muchas gracias
Thank
a
you,
nuestros
Cami.
panelistas.
Thank you to our
Quiero más bien darle
panelists.
la palabra a mi
I
estimado
want to hand the
colega
floor to my
Sergio
dear
Caballero
colleague
de
Sergio
IFPMA.
Caballero
Sergio,
from
muchas gracias a
IFPMA.
IFPMA por todo
Sergio, thank you
el
so
apoyo
much
que brinda para
for
América
all the
Latina, pero también
support
a nivel
provided for Latin
global. Así
America
que nos encantaría que nos
at
ayudaras
global
con el cierre
level.
de esta actividad.
So we would
Thank you,
like you to
Diego.
help us with the
So
closing of this
very
activity.
quickly, just a few reflections. We had a very interesting discussion and presentations from all the speakers. Thank you so much for that. I think starting with the reflections on how the complexity of our world is increasing. You know, not only we have aging populations and global challenges like climate change and antimicrobial resistance and the threat of the next pandemic that might be coming up. But we also have more complex and innovative products coming from the pharmaceutical industry. We see that Reliance is really not just one efficiency tool, is really a way to manage all these complexity while maintaining a robust regulatory oversight. And really, it's also a way, and we've seen the examples shown here today, it's a demonstrator of regulatory maturity or an exemplar of regulatory maturity, like we say in our IFPMA position paper, because we recognize that to implement Reliance, it requires, time investment and effort in creating new systems, new processes, building trust. But in the long term, it really plays out, and we've heard today a little bit about the how to measure the financial implications of implementing Reliance as an example. Also, what stood for me today was the continuous improvement on Reliance and the experience shared by ARCSA in terms of how to optimize the procedure initially put into place, listening to the feedback from industry and other stakeholders to making it adjustments, and now hearing this information that approvals within 90 days are possible and that actually industry applicants are going for that pathway is really motivating. Also, the story of benchmarking and Anvisa's experience on working with the WHO benchmarking tool, not as an end on itself, but as a tool for continuous improvement, for improving transparency as a public institution, as Daniela said, is really motivating. And I think to wrap up, just to say that Daniela mentioned that Anvisa has been engaged in Reliance since around 2018. I think that's also more or less the time when I started working on this topic. And looking back is really remarkable how much the discussion has advanced. And I wanted to end on this high note that continuing this dialogue, this collaboration, building trust, which is essential for Reliance, will be able to build more efficient and resilient regulatory systems for the future. So thank you so much, everyone.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. Un agradecimiento a
Thank you so
nuestros
much,
colegas de
Sergio. I want to
IFMA
thank
y
our
de EFPIA por su
colleagues from IFMA and
colaboración en la
EFPIA
organización de este
for their
webinar, a
collaboration
las cerca de
in the
400 personas que
organization
nos
of this
acompañaron y
webinar,
por
and to
supuesto
the
a
almost
nuestros
400 people who would
reguladores, en
hear with us, and of
especial
course
a
our
Anvisa y
regulators,
a AXA por
and
sumarse a
also to
esta
Anvisa and AXA
discusión, a todos ustedes por compartir sus
for this
conocimientos, por
discussion.
compartir sus
Thank you so much
experiencias y
for
por
sharing your
compartir
knowledge,
sus
sharing your
expectativas. Desde
experience,
FIFARMA
and your
queremos
expectations
ratificar
from
nuestro
FIFARMA.
compromiso
We want
con
to
la sociedad
ratify our
latinoamericana y con
commitment
todas las
with the Latin
personas y con
American
todos los
society
pacientes
and with
y nuestro
everybody
apoyo
and
a
all the people
continuar
and all the patients
impulsando el
in our support to
fortalecimiento de
keep
los sistemas
driving the
regulatorios en
strengthening
toda
of
la
regulatory
región, como
systems
lo son, como
in the
un pilar
entire region
esencial
as
de la
a
salud pública.
essential pillar
Y quisiera
of
cerrar
public
este
health.
webinar con una
And I would like to
reflexión que
close this
resume muy
webinar with
bien el
a
propósito de este
reflection
encuentro.
that
Y
really
es que cuando el
summarizes
sistema
the
regulatorio es
purpose
sólido,
of this meeting.
no
When a
solamente
regulatory system
protege
is
la
strong,
salud,
it not only
sino
protects
que también
health,
abre las puertas al
it opens the
conocimiento,
doors
a la
to knowledge,
innovación y a la equidad.
innovation, and
Fortalecer los
equality.
sistemas
And
regulatorios
strengthening
es una
regulatory
decisión,
systems
pero sobre
is a
todo un
decision, but
compromiso
also
con las personas. Los
a
invitamos a
commitment
seguir
with
a
people.
FIFARMA, a
We
EFPIA
invite
y a
you to follow
EFPMA en nuestras
FIFARMA,
redes sociales
FPA,
para que
and
puedan
IFPMA
acceder a
in our
recursos
social media
adicionales
so that you can have
sobre el reliance
additional
regulatorio.
resources
Y los quiero
on
invitar a que
regulatory
sigamos
reliance.
impulsando
And I would like
sistemas
to invite
regulatorios
you to
eficientes,
keep
ágiles y
driving more efficient
resilientes en
regulatory
beneficio de
systems
nuestra
that are
región.
more
Gracias
agile
a
and
todos por su
resilient
tiempo.
for the
Excelente
benefits
día.
of our region. Thank you so much for your time and have a great day. Thank you, Diego.